with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority
Be right back,
Report.
folks. Sorry.
One second.
With Sam. Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, July 7th, 2022. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Matt Huber, professor at Syracuse University and author of Climate Change's Class War, Building Socialism on a Warming Planet. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson is officially resigning as prime minister after dozens of his cabinet members took the lead on that front. Down goes Bojo to make way for another terrible Tory. Back in the U.S., cops say that the Highland Park shooter admitted that he was contemplating a second massacre at a parade in Wisconsin, which is where he fled. Emails show that Biden had planned to nominate the anti-abortion Republican to a lifetime federal judgeship on the day that Roe got overturned. They scrapped that.
Come on, man.
Come on, man. Come on, man. Roe getting overturned really messed with my announcement. My big deal with Mitch.
For what?
For peanuts. Rolling Stone has obtained audio from the leader of an anti-abortion activist group saying that she prayed with the Supreme Court justices. Didn't say who. Hasn't been verified, but that's what was said. Try again. Schumer is gearing up for another dance with Joe Manchin on drug prices. A bill that would allow Medicare to negotiate directly with manufacturers, but with a few industry-friendly tweaks this time around. France will nationalize its largest utility company, EDF, with the Russian war in Ukraine being the final nail in that coffin. We should take note here in the United States. It's now being discovered that James Comey was conveniently the subject of a 2017 hyper-intensive audit on his taxes. A kind of audit only done to 5,000 people in the whole country in a year. So that was during Trump's tenure. Just odd timing. Workers at an Amazon warehouse in Kentucky are officially unionizing with Amazon Labor Union. And lastly, WNBA star Brittany Griner has pleaded guilty to drug charges in Russia. What this means for her release, I do not know. But free Brittany Griner. All this and more on today's program. Welcome to another edition of the Majority Report, as we say, here on Thursday. Just Matt and I today. So not a double. What do you call it?
The skeleton crew.
Yeah, skeleton crew. It's a two-hander. We're going to be talking to Matt Huber in a bit for a conversation that I'm very much looking forward to, because I just had a debate over the weekend about with family about individual action.
You are really debating your family lately.
It's unwilling. It is. I don't want to, but they always ask me questions, and it's combative. That's the nature of it.
See, I've maybe a more conservative family, but they also they do ask me a lot of questions because they know what line of work I'm in, and they're often more. I think because they're farther away from me, they're willing to be more persuaded by me in a weird way. If we're close together, it might be a little bit more contentious.
Yeah, I mean, it's also just how I grew up. One, it's probably why I'm in this field, because that was such an emphasis in my family. But two, it's they kind of get off on challenging me for some reason. And it's not my favorite thing, which oddly, so I'm the one that wants to disengage the most, based on that dynamic. But I digress. Individual action on climate change and emphasizing personal consumptive choices is not the way to go, is my stance on that, and I'll be fleshing that out with Matt Huber. But I wanted to return to Uvalde, because it is important that we keep the spotlight on the fallout from the massacre at Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas. Cops are continuing to try to wait it out so the spotlight gets a little less hot on the incredible depth of their incompetence and failure. And
I've been hearing weird reports of traffic stops and stuff like that, maybe some intimidation.
Of the woman that spoke out and tried to jump the fence and spoke about their... Yes,
yep.
She a few weeks ago, she spoke to the press and said essentially that she's terrified because the cops have been blaring their sirens and have been waiting outside her home.
And I don't like the feds either, but in a context like this, I think the onus is on and pressure should be put on the federal government to send their forces down there. So there's at least more light on it, because Texas police are, I mean, even for cops, just in mendacious lying culture about things as severe as dead kids.
Yeah, and I in terms of the feds, Joaquin Castro, a representative from Texas, has called for an FBI investigation. I'm, again, no fan of the FBI, but there needs to be some sort of federal oversight on this.
While there's FBI, let's point it towards the cops. Exactly.
Right. So credit to CNN here. They are not letting up, and they interviewed teacher Arnie Reyes, one of the survivors of the massacre. Here is his recounting of what he witnessed and how long it took for the cops to arrive.
Arnie Reyes was the only survivor from classroom 111 at Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas. After a month in the hospital, 10 surgeries from bullet wounds to his arm and back, he is finally back home and talking about the day that ripped so many lives apart.
I was getting the kids under the table. I turned around, and when I turned around, I saw him, but I just saw the shadow, and that's when I saw the two, the fire, and then I ended up on the ground as well.
And so you get hit, and you go down.
Mm-hmm.
And what's going on in your mind at that time?
I'm just thinking and waiting for somebody to come and save us. You always think, something bad is happening, that the cops get there so fast, that they rush in and they help you, And I was just waiting for that. I was waiting for anybody to come save us.
We now know it would be a long and agonizing 74 minutes before police would enter Reyes' classroom to kill the gunman.
He did a lot of things to make me flinch or react in some way. And that was one of them, where he got my, as I'm laying down, either like this or like this, tapping it, but it was splashing on my face.
The blood.
Yeah.
Was he trying to see if you were still alive?
I think so.
you're laying there for over an hour, right? And no one's coming to help. What do you think of that?
That they forgot us. I mean, they probably thought that we were all dead or something, but if they would have gone in before, some of them probably would have made it.
It's a question many are struggling with as precious seconds.
Yeah. So, I mean, credit to the bravery of Arnie Reyes there. I mean, like, the fact that the immediate right-wing response, I can't get over this, because they've abandoned this because the facts don't even approach anything close to, like, a case that they could make to blame the teachers. But, you know, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick was out there blaming teachers for not closing doors. And
which was a lie planted by the cops.
Exactly. And the cops' lies continue to drip, drip, drip out. Yesterday, the Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training Report indicated that there was a cop that had the shooter in the cop's crosshairs and could have shot the shooter and held off on firing to, quote, await confirmation from his supervisor, which was that was the entirety of this, right? Which was a lot of people standing around, twiddling their thumbs, waiting for some sort of authority, even though they had all of the training, the requisite training that is supposed to stop this.
The book says once you have 2 or more people, you breach and stop the killing. That's like literally the handbook.
And they didn't do it. And so this is why, one, putting empowering cops through more weaponry, through more funding. When Biden chants fund the police at the State of the Union, because they have this perception that it doesn't go over well with the suburban voters, who are the only people that they seem to care about at this point. The consequences of that are just more money taken away from communities that would help them and going towards cops who will do absolutely nothing with it. And we have a case in point. And let's play this from the most recent massacre, or one of the more recent massacres. There was a shooting in Philly as well, and I'm sure there will be one very soon. But the Highland Park massacre that happened on July 4th, this is a reporter speaking to Highland Park police about how the shooter, Bobby Crimo, was able to legally buy the gun after he had 2 wellness checks on him and had other weaponry like knives taken away from him because of the threats that he was making. How that did not set off some sort of red flag law in Illinois when that's supposed to happen under their state regulations.
Passed 4 background checks despite these reports. Sir, the shooter passed 4 background checks despite these reports of an attempted suicide and the fact that he said he wanted to kill everyone and had this knife collection. How is that possible in a state with some of the strictest gun laws, and how frustrating is that for you?
So a couple things. I made these comments yesterday that I think we need to increase our awareness about the red flag law. We can certainly get you the details of that red flag law. We have a little bit of information about that today.
Law enforcement says because the shooter's family didn't press charges or request weapons be taken away as part of the red flag law, the troubling incidents did not impact him buying the guns. Could the police have made that request, though, if the family didn't? Since the police went out to the home, could they have?
It's on a case-by-case basis, and it would depend on the individual information.
So the answer to that is yes. The police could have flagged this, and they could have used their discretion in order to plant that red flag, but they did not. And so, but these twin instances, these twin mass shootings, but one which has an incredibly egregious police response that could be covering up something larger we still do not know, which is why there needs to be a federal investigation into this. And the kind of just standard police response here, which is to not take these kinds of things seriously, it just goes to show that leaving gun control in the hands of the discretion of cops and responding to gun violence and massacres like this is not the right way to go. And you know what? The bipartisan bill put together by Cornyn and others, heralded as this big victory, does exactly that. It gives law enforcement more discretion and more and wider, potentially, we don't know the full details of it because it has to go to the House and get fleshed out, but potentially gives them more funds in order to combat gun violence. It's all empowering law enforcement to this degree. It's the wrong way to go. You need to target the manufacturing and the sale of this weaponry. These kinds of weapons should not be on the streets.
Yeah, wanting to buy that weapon is a red flag in and of itself. I saw this thread of, you know how gun pedants always get in there and be like, well, it's actually this, and so you can't do that. They were convinced that was an AK-47, and they're like, look at all the people that are going to say that he bought it legally, right? Well, guess what? It wasn't. It was a gun that he actually bought legally. So now what? I mean, nobody should be able to buy that kind of weaponry. I like, even if you want to entertain like community self-defense, personal self-defense, or like needs for hunting, that is not necessary at all. Nothing remotely. Those magazines should be illegal, and modifying it should be illegal. And if you do it, you should go to jail.
Yep. So there's not much more to say, except that the focus on red flag laws is not going to help anything. And frankly, if I were a Democrat voting in the House on this kind of legislation, I would sink it. There's zero value in giving Republicans a rhetorical victory where they can seem like they're more reasonable on gun control than they are for legislation that's going to do absolutely nothing and might actually have negative effects because it gives law enforcement, gives cops who have been proven to be incompetent at best nationwide more power, which is the exact wrong thing that we need right now.
Yeah, as they tell us to go out and protest for abortion rights, they're giving the cops more money. Who's going to be smashing heads?
Yeah. More money for tear gas. All right, with that said, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by Matt Huber. We are back, and we are joined now by Matt Huber, professor at Syracuse University and author of Climate Change is Class War, Building Socialism on a Warming Planet. Matt, thank you so much for being here and doubling up on the maths today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. So I mentioned this at the start of the show that many of the ideas that you discuss in your book have I've been debating them with certain people. Just the overemphasis on individual consumption versus a larger critique of production, and having this be at the feet of the government as opposed to individuals, and largely individuals who have the means and the time to engage in the process of cutting back on certain aspects of their consumption. So let's talk about that core tension that you explore in the book: consumption versus production, as an emphasis on climate change.
Yeah. The first thing to say is that we've kind of almost been trained to only think about the climate change and responsibility through consumption, where we get these carbon footprint calculators and we think about, what we do in our homes, how we drive, what we eat, how we fly, whether or not we have children. Like, all these actions we do in the market as consumers can be traced to various kinds of emissions. And that way of thinking just pretty much erases the role of the people that own and control and profit from production. And so, like, when you think of your carbon footprint as like driving and emitting a certain amount of emissions, like, you're totally ignoring the role of the oil company that sold you that gasoline that's powering your car, and they're making all the money, they're making all the profit from that. And in a larger sense, like, our energy system is an incredibly complex social system of production. Like the electric grid it's crazy. It has to be balanced, like supply and demand. So you have all these actors who are provisioning electricity to us, and that if we were focusing on that relationship of production is a lot more straightforward than all these kind of scattered consumption acts. And the production is like, for instance, if you were to take a coal-fired electric grid and turn it over to clean energy, the consumption acts can be the exact same, but they would be, from a climate perspective, completely different. So what the book tries to do is to say, really, the struggle over climate change is really about how we produce not just energy, but the things that use energy in our economy, like steel plants and cement plants and agriculture and all these productive infrastructures that use a lot of energy. Like, that's what we have to transform. So in a kind of old school kind of socialist way, like about seizing the means of production, like, that's actually what this struggle is about. It's about really taking control over a system that's run for profit by capital, who's controls it to just make money, to try to say we need to totally transform this energy production system to decarbonize it and make sure it runs on clean energy so we can save the planet from being uninhabitable. So there's a lot of other things I could say about how focusing on consumers and carbon footprints really distracts. Like, even when you focus on the rich and their sort of high emitting.
That was going to be my next question, right? Because just focusing on individual wealthy people's consumption but where are they consuming from, right?
Exactly.
Like, I mean, you have 3 pools at your 3 houses, and you're flying to Timbuktu or wherever you're going. But you are consuming from someplace, no matter how wealthy you are.
And by only focusing on what they're using their money for as rich people, we don't look at how they make their money. Yeah. And that activity is going to have way more carbon impact. So you could take a CEO of a fossil fuel company that spends like 12 hours a day, like managing a global network of fossil fuel extraction production systems. And yeah, maybe they might go home into their heated pool that uses a lot of energy, but their activity of being a fossil fuel exec is way more impactful than what they're doing in their private consumption life. And that's, really where the power is. Because the other thing is, when we think about our responsibility only in terms of consumers, we act as if the capitalist market system is really just this free market where dispersed, decentralized consumers have the power to kind of choose and shape demand. And that's what's driving the economy. That's what shapes production. But, a left perspective would say that's not how the economy works. It's really controlled by a small minority of owners who own production, who profit from these systems. And they're the ones with the real power. And so that's where we really have to pay attention, because, Emma, I think you actually brought this up when we talked about this long ago. But like, when you only look at someone's consumption, You could look at like a Hollywood actor who has a mansion and drives a Hummer and a private jet, and compare that person with a fossil fuel executive who takes public transit and is a vegetarian, and you would conclude that the Hollywood actor has more impact on the climate compared with the owner of fossil capital. It just makes absolutely no sense to think about it that way. So we're really missing a lot when we only look at the consumptive realm, that's for sure.
And even on a rhetorical level, like, I mean, one, you mentioned that the solution that you're talking about is so much more straightforward. And my experience in covering politics is that often straightforward answers are a little bit scary for capitalists because it involves a class struggle. And the simple answer usually always boils down to that. But even from a political rhetorical level, like Democrats focusing on, we'll just use this country as an example because I'm most familiar with it, but any like center left party, whatever, focusing on individual consumption as a way to combat climate change is like a gift to the right wing because it's an impossible bar to meet. It also is targeted at a certain class of likely suburbanites, upper middle class types who have the ability to engage in that kind of behavioral change because of wealth and time and the kinds of education that they probably received. Like, it is almost working in tandem with the Democrats saying, basically, we're only going to focus on winning over suburban voters who are disaffected by Trump. Like, that is the kind of person that they're tailoring that towards, and that has zero broad appeal.
Yeah. I mean, you can listen to what the right says about climate politics, and they say this is a conspiracy amongst a liberal elite that's trying to concoct these policies in Washington that are ultimately meant to change your life, to make your life worse, to make your life cost more, and to make you sort of adopt this sort of goody like vegan lifestyle or whatever. And that resonates with a working class that's been beaten down and basically suffering through this kind of highly unequal capitalist system for the last 40, 50 years. And so the right's able to kind of mobilize this kind of opposition to climate on the basis of a kind of class appeal that says this is going to cost your life economically. And you're absolutely right. Like, a lot of liberals just play right into it because a lot of their politics ultimately is about kind of performing this low carbon virtuous life and performing this kind of these individual consumption acts. And that, we need to get beyond that and actually speak to how we can combine climate action with policies that actually improve people's lives, make their access to energy systems more secure and things like that. So.
And in terms of who's driving the climate conversation, let's talk about the makeup of those people and how it probably influences the rhetoric, because I think that fits well into what we just touched on. Using PMC can seem maybe just a little tired to a degree, but those are the kinds of people, right, who are in charge of this discourse. I mean, yes, it's scientists too, but relying on data to sell your political project is not a good way to go. But maybe if you can expand on that, how the makeup of the people, the kinds of professional types who are leading climate discourse has affected the way that it's been portrayed.
Yeah, it's funny. I submitted the book proposal in 2017 that was going to be anchored in this very PMC analysis. And for those that don't know, the professional managerial class was a concept coined by Barbara and John Ehrenreich in the 1970s. And then after 2017, basically the left blew up with this debate over the PMC, and it polarized the 2020 primary between the Bernie and Warren factions, and it became this extremely polarizing concept. But I had to soldier through because I really think it's important to thinking about climate politics, because if you look around about who's really driving climate advocacy, it is what you would call the professional managerial class. And I would actually include scientists as really a big part of that class. People, the way I define it in the book is people that try to marshal credentials of some kind to carve out advantages in the labor market. And that can be degrees or licenses or any types of things. But essentially, it's mostly like using hyper educated degrees to kind of create these kind of professional, secure middle class types of advantages in the labor market. And so we're talking about academics, scientists, journalists, people that work at NGOs, staffers at NGOs, government bureaucrats, agents, people like this. And this is the kind of class of people that are most vocal about climate change. And essentially, like, there's a couple things that kind of define this class project in a kind of material and ideological sense. The first would be that because they're so invested in using credentials and knowledge to gain these advantages, they're really into making climate politics really about science and knowledge and believing the science and belief in denial, and really vilifying the right, not because they sanction fossil fuel extraction for profit, but more because they fund denial and they're denying the truth and they're doing a war against facts or whatever. And this really came to a fever pitch in the Trump years, right? Because it was just this sort of like from an administration that was denying truth, denying science. And if you recall, we had a March for Science. And if you kind of just go on Google Images and look at like the types of folks that went out to the March for Science, and that can be seen as like a mass action of the professional class. And the other thing about this class is, and there's a debate on whether or not we should call them a class. You could call them a stratum or a class, whatever. But is that the class project is about attaining some level of material economic security, like a sort of a middle class job in academia and journalism or whatever it might be. And so and again, we should be clear that that's becoming more and more out of reach for much of what could be called the PMC. Like, people that follow sort of DSA politics will probably be familiar with this idea that DSA is kind of this place where downwardly mobile, college-educated people are fleeing to, and people that are working low-wage, working-class jobs but have these credentials, because there's just not jobs anymore for these types of credentialed people. But the goal, obviously, is to try to use these credentials to gain this kind of middle-class security. But with that, with middle-class security comes this level of consumption that is comfortable and might involve like owning a car and even owning a home, maybe. And so and maybe like having to fly a lot for professional, sort of professional reasons. And so with this middle-class security, a lot of the PMC discourse becomes really focused on their own consumption as the driver, because they're participating at such a high level in these systems of consumption. They feel like instead of blaming the owners of production that I said before are really to blame, they blame themselves and say it's really, I'm engaging in this high consumption lifestyle while the world burns. And so there's this level of what I call carbon guilt and feelings of complicity. And so those are kind of the two forms of climate politics that I see really predominant amongst this PMC group.
It's not a coincidence that the same group of people are all about like lean-in style feminism, white fragility style racial reckoning, and also individualistic climate action. Like, those things can all fit in some sort of thesis that I haven't been able to flesh out yet, or you could just call them PMC and be done with it, really.
Well, I don't know if you've ever had Catherine Liu on, but she wrote a book on the PMC called Virtue Hoarders. And to me, that title, it just really does get at a lot of what's going on here. Basically, virtue and projecting it as this sort of stuff that's really not of the masses, right? Because part of the PMC thing is kind of sneering at the masses. You know, the people that go to the mall or something are what's really destroying climate change. And so hogging this kind of virtue by putting solar panels on your roof or eating organic or going vegan, like this becomes the key kind of politics, and you can translate it to all various other forms, as you just said.
So let's talk about the strategies that the three strategies that you lay out that this group of folks, scientists, yes, PMC types, you know, whatever, lawyers, journalists, etc., seem to emphasize. And we've talked about it, I guess, you know, a good amount. But if you don't mind giving those 3 points and laying that out for us.
So I kind of lay out three archetypes of the PMC climate activist. The first is what I call the science communicator, and I've talked a lot about that, which is essentially, but it does subscribe to this very kind of liberal theory of change that if the masses really understood and knew the truth about climate change, then action would inevitably follow in a democracy, which I think more and more we're seeing that we don't really live in a democracy. But this idea that the real problem with the climate crisis is denial of the science, and we just need to kind of make people aware. And so obviously there's a lot of prominent climate scientists who have become really, you know, powerful spokespeople. But I think there's also a whole kind of cadre of journalists and other, I don't know, I guess you call them influencers now, who are really sort of invested in what the science has to say and like trying to fight denial of it, right? So the science communicators. The next one is what I call the policy technocrats. And these are the folks that really propose a whole set of like policy technocratic fixes to the climate crisis. And these really emerged in the 1980s and 90s. It's sort of during the heyday of the kind of neoliberal revolution towards free market policies. And these policy technocrats sort of ceded the ground and said, okay, the right Reagan revolution has won. We need to design kind of really clever, smart policies that are grounded in free market ideas that can win over not only Democrats, but they even have the idea that they can win over Republicans with these really smart technocratic policies. Now, these are things like carbon taxes or cap and trade type market where you can like trade emission credits that give people certain rights or property rights to pollute. And then create a market in these emission rights. And ultimately, it boils down to this idea that the market is not adequately pricing the emissions of climate change, so that if we can just get the prices right and internalize the cost of these emissions through carbon pricing, then the market will just solve it naturally. And so the policy technocrats have been banging this drum for decades about how smart this policy is of carbon pricing. Let's put a price on carbon. But you know, as we've hinted at before, like it might be smart to them, but when you actually try to implement this, it ultimately leads to raising the price of energy. And you see how, I mean, we're just seeing that now with inflation, but in France, when Macron tried to implement a fuel tax under the banner of climate action, it led to this kind of working class revolt amongst the yellow vest. You know, they've tried to pass a carbon tax in the very like green liberal state of Washington in 2016 and 2018. It failed miserably. So these very smart solutions amongst the technocrats are not popular. They're not even trying to like have mass appeal. They just sort of appeal to these very policy oriented people. And one of the organizations I profile is called the Citizens Climate Lobby, and their kind of flagship policy is something called a carbon fee and dividend. And one of their slogans is, we're going to outsmart climate change. And to me, that really epitomized this idea that like, we're really smart. We're going to come up with these smart policies and we're going to outsmart this horrific global planetary thing that's facing us.
And the idea that we're going to outsource the effects of climate change or the consequences of it to regular people in the form of like some sort of individual taxation, as opposed to just targeting the producers, the capitalists, the oil executive, or the oil companies at the crux of this. I mean, you mentioned France there, and this France just nationalized its. I think yesterday. This is not an oil company. I believe it's nuclear and other kinds of energy. But its largest utility company after the war in Ukraine has basically just caused so much. Talk about the free market failing in terms of energy. We're seeing that right now with gas prices and the way that oil producers are holding the rest of the world hostage to this degree. Like, we need to be talking about nationalizing these oil companies, and that is the most straightforward solution, in my opinion. But when you talk about outsmarting climate change, it's hilarious to me that the smartest solution is the simplest one that we keep returning to. And what outsmarting climate change really means is, how can we burden regular people more by avoiding, through our own cowardice and inability to actually stand up to powerful people, targeting the companies, the production of of oil and of what's causing the worst of climate change.
Yeah, I came up when I was writing this book. I came up with a little pithy slogan that we should not tax molecules, we should tax the rich, which is it's insane, because the idea of a carbon tax, carbon is this neutral stuff that working class people use, you and I use, rich people use, and this idea that it's causing climate change, we're going to tax this neutral stuff. It can easily be turned into something that's going to be a tax on everyone, right? And no one likes that. So, traditionally, when the left was powerful, the main way the left got stuff done is through mass redistribution of wealth, and that's through taxing the rich. And so we need a massive and taxing of the rich. And by the way, over the last 40 years, nothing but tax cuts for the rich, from Reagan through W through Trump, like that's just what they've been doing. And so we could, and that even, like, if we don't even want to, obviously I'm all on board for nationalizing the energy sector. I think that's something ultimately we have to do. But if we could just like make our tax regime way more progressive and generate a huge amount of revenue to actually invest in remaking our energy system and remaking our infrastructure, like that kind of big, let's say like New Deal style sort of public goods, public investment regime. And in the New Deal, they tax the rich at these incredible levels too. That's what we need. And focusing on the molecules sort of distracts us from this class struggle that we're facing, and what we need to do to solve it.
It is. I'm hoping we can flesh out the class struggle element even more, because as you mentioned, and we talked about, the people dominating discourse are the professional managerial types, etc. Poor people are essentially left out of climate debate, and not just poor people within the United States, but the global South is largely ignored, and the global South is going to bear the brunt of how of climate change as it continues to wreak havoc on the planet. Can you talk about that dynamic, and particularly how global capitalism has made nations in the global South vulnerable, and how at the same time they're also given zero voice, for the most part, in the international climate debate?
Yeah, well, I would actually tweak that a little, because I think when you go into these PMC climate, they often call them like climate justice spaces, and actually they are very keen on they would say centering the frontline communities that are going to bear the worst consequences of climate change. And the whole conception of climate justice is that these poor, marginalized communities like indigenous peoples and peasant communities who are really trying to subsist from the land and from nature directly, and are seeing droughts and floods and horrific consequences right directly. And I think that's super important, and this climate justice framing is really powerful morally. But what that framing leaves out is that it focuses so on this kind of very small marginalized populations that it leaves out the greater mass of the working class, as I would say, in a capitalist society, because most of us don't actually rely on the land for our subsistence, and most of us are just trying to survive in the market by gaining a wage or an income, and so this kind of constant focus on these frontline communities and marginalized communities ultimately is creating this somewhat minoritarian politics that doesn't quite doesn't really speak to the greater masses of the working class. So what I argue is that to actually build the kind of power to deliver for those poor marginalized groups that are really suffering under, sometimes directly by fossil capital, like extraction and refineries and all these horrific projects like the Dakota Access Pipeline going through Standing Rock and all these things, to win on those struggles, we actually need to defeat, the same people, oil companies, big capital. We need to build the power to defeat them. And to do that, you actually need to appeal not just to the morality of these disenfranchised, marginalized groups, but you need to appeal to the broader mass of the working class. So what I argue, and it wasn't just me, it's like I think that the genius of the idea of a Green New Deal was that it was going to be a climate program that basically centered just these sort of material gains for everyday working people in a highly unequal capitalist system. So things like a job guarantee, Medicare for all, things like instead of a carbon tax, how about cheaper or even free electricity as a human right? Like these kinds of public goods delivering material gains to the broader masses of working class people could be a way to actually build the power. And then ultimately, I think when you bring up this global South issue, it's really important to realize that in terms of global emissions, historically, the United States is by far the greatest emitter. It's by far the worst, violator of international. It's always the agent in these international treaty negotiations, whether it be Copenhagen or Kyoto or wherever it was last year. I'm blanking, but it's the United States.
Scotland, right?
I think
Glasgow.
So. Glasgow. Yeah, Glasgow. United States is always sort of the one messing everything up. And the worst case of that was Obama in 2009. He just threw a hand grenade at the whole system and it fell apart. So the U.S. has been the biggest barrier to international climate cooperation and climate action. So if we could build a kind of Green New Deal type politics in the U.S., it wouldn't just have to be about decarbonizing the U.S. It'd have to be about transferring these green technologies to the world. And, it's kind of similar to this vaccine issue, allowing this technology to really be expanded to the entire world so that the whole world can deal with this global issue instead of just the wealthier parts of the world.
Yeah, well, I mean, if Biden's not going to waive vaccine intellectual property protections, I doubt he'll do it for electric vehicles or solar or whatever. I mean, the United States is behind, frankly, in terms of capitalist terms on the production of those because of the strength of the Republican Party in this country. So they're going to try to milk that once that's more widely proliferated for everything that it's worth. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the concept of how deindustrialization in the United States has influenced this debate, because largely for decades the United States has been a service economy for the most part. Mm-hmm. Industrial production has been outsourced to other nations, poorer nations, and we're bearing the brunt of that during COVID in terms of the global supply chain being so complex that's been disrupted, and the United States does not have the capability or redundancy here domestically to reckon with it. But I also think it influences the politics around climate change that in a way that it is not influenced, or it's more unique here than it is in other nations. Do you agree with that sentiment? And how so, if so?
Yeah, it's a big issue because ultimately climate change is about our industrial production system. It's the Industrial Revolution 250 years ago was about essentially using coal, a fossil fuel, to power these mechanical machines like steam engines and eventually locomotives. And that and that kind of big industrial breakthrough was rooted in fossil fuels. And that's kind of, we're still stuck with this problem where we use fossil fuels to power these really incredible machines that are rooted back in the Industrial Revolution. But as you were hinting, like essentially what's happened is the United States and many other rich countries went through this Industrial Revolution, and the working class got quite organized and built up incredible power through unions and political parties to actually build a political regime that benefited those workers to some degree. And this kind of reached its heyday in the post World War II era of, like this sort of Fordist, high unionized regime where capitalism for a short 25 years was actually like sort of redistributing wealth in a somewhat egalitarian way. But of course, as you suggested, what happened was capital got, their profitability started to suffer, and they decided, well, we don't want to deal with these unions and this redistributive states anymore, so we're going to offshore capital around the world, or we're going to automate away these jobs to get rid of these pesky unionized workers. And that kind of process really disempowered the industrial working class and really hollowed out a lot of these former industrial regions that we still see today, whether it be Ohio or Pennsylvania, which has now become like Trump country, And at that same time was where we saw the rise of, yes, a service economy, which was based on like extremely low wage, precarious type of work, but also this sort of rise of higher education as this pathway to a sort of a more secure knowledge economy. And that just sort of widened the wider inequality in society as a whole. So you have this problem where the crisis of climate change is caused by our industrial production system, but most people in our society don't have a lot of contact with that system. And the PMC people really just sort of look at industrial production as just this stuff out there that's kind of causing injustice and causing harm, and we just need to stop it. But I think reviving kind of that more sort of old socialist tradition of like actually building up working class power over the industrial production system to transform it, to seize it and transform it is actually what we need to recover, because that's ultimately what the climate crisis is really about. It's about building a bunch of new industrial stuff. And you can, a big wind farm, there's very few things that are more industrial than that. But it's going to have to include a whole host of other things like transmission lines and even things like possibly like nuclear plants. And this industrial infrastructure is what we ultimately need to transform. But we again have experienced sort of decades of disempowering the workers that really do the work in those industrial systems.
So before we wrap, I wanted to pick your brain on the concept of degrowth, right? Where, I sometimes will have people write in and say that degrowth politics are the way to go in order to combat climate change. And I am incredibly skeptical of those kinds of arguments because, again, I don't find it feasible, nor do I think it is nor do I think that it fits into the larger class struggle that we want to emphasize here. But what is your opinion on some of those calls and how that fits into the larger climate debate?
Well, the whole problem is if you look up degrowth, if you look up D as a prefix, it means less, it means privation, it means we're gonna like scale down. And if you look around about its various definitions of degrowth, it's always centering reduction, less, how to live better with less. It centers downscaling, and ultimately their politics really focuses on this kind of aggregate scaling down of the economy. And I should say, because I get in trouble on these debates, that there's a lot of things they propose that I would agree with. They propose decommodifying social, public services. They propose a shorter work week and things like this that any leftist is going to be behind, But the way in which they frame the debate is always centering less and always centering reduction. And again, for the mass of the working class in countries like the United States, so-called rich countries, they've seen nothing but less for the last several decades. They've seen stagnating wages. They've seen their benefits cut. They've seen the welfare state hollowed out. And so always centering less in a politics of reduction to a working class that is already suffering through austerity is just strategically doesn't make a lot of sense. And a more traditional class struggle approach to politics is to say we need to, you can even say, degrow the rich. We need to take from the rich to give more, to give increase to the working class and to the masses, and less for the few and more for the many. So this kind of class struggle is about really taking from the rich to make life for everyone better and more secure. And when you talk about either growth or GDP growth, it's always at the aggregate of society. It's kind of like this aggregate measure that conceals the more divisions and class struggles in society.
Yeah.
And so we really need to have that language of division and conflict between classes. And the one last thing I'll say is they often say, yeah, we get that, and we don't want to degrow the poor countries of the global South, right? We just want to degrow the rich countries, right? But when they even say that, they'll often say we're going to degrow the global North, but this will allow the global South countries to grow. But as I was just suggesting, global North countries are not these aggregate entities. They have huge amounts of poor people and struggling working class people. So saying that we're going to degrow your whole country doesn't help this problem either.
And in terms of those politics, it sounds a little bit too close to austerity politics, and we always know who bears the brunt of austerity politics.
For sure.
All right. Well, Matt Huber, can't thank you enough. Amazing discussion today. Author of Climate Change as Class War: Building Socialism on a Warming Planet. Matt will put the link to your book in the podcast description and in the YouTube description and anywhere else that you are listening/watching this program. Thanks so much for your time today, Matt. Really appreciate it. Good to talk to you again.
Really great honor to be on the program. Thanks so much.
Oh, an honor. Wow. All right. Well, with that said, we are going to wrap up the free hour of this program and head into the fun half, where we'll be taking your calls. 646-257-3920 is the number. We will be reading your IMs. We have some responses to that interview, and we'll be joined by Matt Binder and Brandon Sutton for discussions. Maybe we'll be making fun of some right-wingers. I would love to have a Jordan Peterson segment every day. That's how much joy I get making fun of him.
Scrounge something up. I haven't seen anything.
Yeah, I don't know if we had it, but because we had one yesterday and we had one the day before, and I just realized he's definitely my favorite right-winger to make fun of right now.
Yeah, and I do have a new drop that I forgot to upload into Sound Pulse.
But do the other one.
Okay, yeah, here's...
As I'm going to ask you to plug what happened last night on Left Reckoning.
Sons of bitches.
Actually, very similar conversation to the one which I just had with Matt Huber. Lee Phillips to talk about a lot of similar stuff, basically. So if you want to
double up
on that, and also we got into more Rogan, DeSantis, Tim Pool stuff in the fun half. I got in the post game last night for Patreon.com/Left Reckoning. Did a deep dive into all of Ron DeSantis's the ways he's attacking public teachers, the Don't Say Gay stuff, the Hillsdale College stuff, where they had the thing
the test for your politics, right?
Well, there's that too, which people are downplaying, but. You know that thing where a certain number of math textbooks were discovered to be too woke or something?
Mm-hmm.
So out of 150 reviewers of math textbooks, only 3 found problems with it. 2 of those had direct connections to Hillsdale College. One of them was a sophomore in political science at Hillsdale College, which is not in Florida, it's in Michigan. And it's a sort of they teach you that George Washington cherry tree story was actually true. That's the type of level of education. So I call that segment "Make Florida Students Dumb Again," which is what DeSantis is doing. So check that out, patreon.com/Left Reckoning last night.
All right. Well, we have Binder, but Since you're flying solo, Matt, maybe we need to take a break before we bring him in. There he is. Let's just, there we go. There he is.
Hello,
Hey.
everybody. Hello, Emma. Hello, Matt. I see that Brendan's not here yet, and Bradley is away on vacation.
He is. He is. I've been seeing some of his photos. He's at National Park. I won't say where. It looks very, very nice.
Ah.
Yeah. Anyway.
He did text me to say, you know, there was a show because no one... He's got no one.
Whoops.
But I had to.
Sons of bitches.
I had to immediately tell Bradley. I had to immediately tell Bradley to get back to vacation immediately because otherwise we'll see who cancels who first. Do you have that one? Do you have that clip
I have
as well?
that. I have that. I can send it to Matt, but. Well,
right now it's just
sons of bitches.
That's all we got.
I love it. I love it.
All right. So what's happening in on Doomed and Scam Economy?
Sure. So on Doomed on Tuesday, I had a show where basically we went through what we knew about the ideology and background of the Highland Park shooter, because you know this guy is a little bit different than what most people I think are looking for in a shooter. With his, you know, he's a nihilistic, like doomer type. Certainly fell into right-wing politics, but this isn't someone who's motivated by like MAGA or anything like that. He's motivated by like their actual like wants. He's more motivated by like the nihilism and you know, the anti-everything that they sort of put out. So we sort of went through that on this on Doomed on this past Tuesday. You can check that out. And then on Scam Economy tonight, live at 9 p.m. Eastern time, I will be talking to Ed Zitron about Voyager, another crypto lending platform that has filed for bankruptcy. And the interesting part about Voyager is that they claim to have been FDIC insured. That does not seem to be the case. They seem to have misled their customers. And we sort of get into the whole broad crypto lending sphere as it is, the whole space, and you know, how very centralized this decentralized world is. And so that's tonight, 9 p.m. at youtube.com/Matt Binder and scameconomy.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Awesome. I'm almost hoping the crypto grift stays around for a little bit longer, even though it's falling apart, just so like you continue to have material.
It's definitely here.
It'll last. All right, great. I should have touched on that with Matt Huber about crypto mining and how that's so terrible for the environment. But anyway, Brandon, what's up?
Sorry for being tardy, everyone. I didn't know we were going today.
Yeah, well, it's because Bradley wasn't here, and we are lost without him. But what's happening over on the discourse, Brandon?
Nothing yet, but ideally we'll have another episode out for you by the end of the week. I will say I have been also following the crypto news very, very closely, and I've been trying to get my co-host to let me speak at them about my obsession with what's been happening, and so I think they've been avoiding me because of that. I might just have to invite Matt on to let me speak to him about it.
Yeah, he would be a lovely guest. Look at that.
Yeah, we should definitely.
I'd be a guest on either of your guys' shows if you even asked.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. I should do that. Well, to be fair, it took me 200 episodes to ask Sam Seder to come on my show.
There you go. All right, so it'll take on episode 400. Maybe I'll come on.
To be fair,
I feel bad.
Well, my original plan was after I saw how long it took for Sam to come on the show, I was like, oh, I should have Sam on as the big 100th episode guest. And then the 100th episode just happened to line up perfectly with the with COVID. The COVID pandemic starting. So I was like, maybe I shouldn't be celebrating the 100th episode while everybody is, at least here in New York City at the time, dying. So that got pushed back, and then it just ended up being the 200th episode.
Well, there you go. With that said, we're going to head into the fun half, 646-257-3920. See you there.
3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now. But I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow. What? What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second. Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt.
What is up, everyone?
Nomi Key.
You did it. Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally false.
No, I'm sorry. Women's...
Stop talking for a second and let me finish.
Where is this coming from, dude?
But dude, you want to smoke this 7A?
Yes.
Hi, me? Is it?
Yes.
Is this me?
Is it me?
It is you.
Is this me? Hello, is this me?
I think it is you. Who is you? No sound. Every single freaking day. What's on your mind?
Sports. We can discuss free markets and we can discuss capitalism.
I'm gonna go start.
Libertarians. They're so stupid though. Common sense says, of course.
Gobbledygook.
We fucking nailed him.
So what's 79 plus 21?
Challenge Matt.
I'm positively quivering.
I believe 96, I want to say.
857-210-35-501. 1 half. 3 8s.
9/11, for instance.
$3,400, $1,900.
6, 5, 4, $3 trillion sold. It's a zero-sum game.
Actually, you're making me think less of it.
But let me say this. Poop.
You call it satire. Sam goes to satire.
On top of it all, my favorite part about you is just like every day, all day, like everything you do.
Without a doubt. Hey, buddy, we see you. All right, folks.
It's just the weak being weeded out, obviously.
Yeah, sun's out, guns out. I don't know.
But you should know.
People just don't like to entertain ideas anymore.
I have a question. Who cares?
Our chat is enabled, folks.
I love it.
I do love that.
Look, gotta jump. Gotta be quick. I gotta jump.
I'm losing it, bro.
2 o'clock. We're already late, and the guy's being a dick. So screw him. Sent to a gulag?
Outrageous.
Like, what is wrong with you?
Love you, bye.
Love you. Bye-bye.
We are back. We are back. Let's read some IMs, shall we? Really quick. Just wanted to see what people thought of the interview because we got a lot of IMs about it. Patton from Ohio. While I agree that France nationalizing their energy provider is a good thing, it's important to note that the company was already 89% owned by the French government. Yes. They merely bought the remaining 11%, which was privately owned, not as extreme as U.S. nationalizing something like Dominion Energy. Totally get it. I just think that we need to put nationalizing energy companies, big oil, more into the conversation, and I'll take any example I can get.
Then go 80%, Brandon.
Yeah. Travis from Pittsburgh. Degrowth is a horrible idea. The thing we need is efficiency. It reduces we use while not decreasing our quality of life. It also allows for others to gain better quality of life with less impact. Yes. Fruity Dinosaur. Emma Peterson has a series coming up with Daily Wire that people think the Elliot Page Twitter stuff is just a stunt for attention to launch the series with. If you guys mind that series, I'm sure you can do a daily segment for a while. I mean, I would think I might have been the first person to say that this was clearly a stunt to get publicity for his Daily Wire thing.
I think it's
pretty
a
obvious.
bad bet though. Like, I don't know. I don't think people like Matt Walsh's thing made a little bit of a splash, but ultimately, like, not as much as they wanted to pretend like it did.
Daily Wire is making a lot of money. I don't think people realize. I think people think that like they're doing these stunts to like because they're desperate. Maybe they're. I mean, it's certainly.
I'm not saying
possible
they're desperate. It's just
right.
I think he
I'm not
wanted
saying
publicity.
You're saying that.
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
but there's
yeah.
some people I've seen who are like, oh, Daily Wire must not be doing so good. They have something like 800,000 plus paying subscribers every
Matt
month.
and I were talking about that though, because like the articles that came out about it, they said that there was a difference between paid subscribers, but the 800,000 number, it was unclear if those were the plus people, aka the paid subscribers.
Yeah, for instance, Peacock did that too, where they would say we have a certain number of subscribers.
Peacock, what's that?
I mean, just to dish a little bit. They suggested that they had a certain number of subscribers, and people read that as paying subscribers. And I'm curious, maybe Daily Wire does have the paying subscribers, but I'm wary of the same sort of fudging.
I feel like it's probably not like a stunt, like he didn't do it on purpose, but once he got banned and this coincided with his tenure at the Daily Wire, it became pivoted towards like not being able to backtrack. But he's definitely going to end up like deleting the tweet quietly and getting back on Twitter.
But it's got to be though on purpose, given the timing of the announcement of his new Daily Wire show, and then he dead names Elliot Page on Twitter when they all know that's what gets them banned, right? I mean, I don't know.
I think he's just on a downward spiral.
That too.
I think he's on deceptively on a downward spiral, despite accumulating more wealth and prestige by being part of the Daily Wire. Maybe he'll do a cameo role in one of their new movies.
Maybe. Let's take a quick call while I check out the clips we're gonna play.
I do appreciate though the entertainment section of Daily Wire with their new movie studio, because I mean Ben Shapiro really wanted to make movies, if you know the trajectory of his career, and he went a really weird route to do it, but he did it.
He followed his dream.
He's like the conservative Tyler Perry. He just went out there and did it.
I hope he dresses up as in drag. I feel like that Crowder might be the conservative Tyler Perry, because he dresses up and has different characters where he's a woman.
He lacks the vision, and Ben Shapiro has the business savvy to make the whole movie empire happen.
Calling from a 408 area code. I picked up a little while ago, but are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, what's your name? Where are you calling from? What's on your mind?
My name is Chris. I'm calling from the Bay Area.
Chris from the Bay Area.
Yes, I have I have two questions, and I'll ask you the first one since you're lawyer adjacent. If the right has all the Heritage Foundation lawyers sitting with the state legislators doing the lawsuits and teeing stuff up for the Supreme Court, where's the one on the left?
They're all in corporate law, and they all have decided that there is a myth that they've all subscribed to, that like defending ExxonMobil is the same as defending like a murderer in a trial, because everyone has the right to a defense.
Well, I mean, there's like Brian Fallon, who was an Obama admin guy, and now he's trying to do the same thing. But the problem is, like, they're ultimately like, it's a knife to a gunfight sort of thing with liberals and the way they fund it, because both of them are funded by rich people. So ultimately, you're not going to have a super radical liberal judiciary thing, whereas like the right, super rich, wealthy white people funding the Federalist Society, like they don't care how extreme that is. They'll put absolute monsters on. So there's like, this is the problem with the people who have money.
I'm sorry, but I'm getting the clip audio and you guys at the same time.
Oh, sorry. 1 second.
I hear Tucker talking about free speech right now, and you guys.
Oh no.
That should have stopped now. Sorry, I didn't know that was playing. Apologize.
Okay, no, it's fine. I was trying. You know, obviously you don't sound like Tucker, but it was
Yeah.
here in Brazil in the middle of what you guys were saying. But like the first thing I thought of when I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but the first thing I thought of when Texas said, okay, well, life begins at conception. It's like, well, where's the lawyer teeing up all the child support cases? And that rabbit hole that you get into with, okay, well, if life begins at conception, why can't I claim a fetus on my taxes and that kind of stuff?
Yeah. Well, there is some hope in terms. I think it was Florida. A Jewish group is suing because abortion is enshrined in Jewish law. The right to have one, essentially, is their claim. That's one of the few responses I've seen that, you know, could have the ability to go somewhere. But frankly, it's just like the Democrats do need an apparatus to funnel liberal justices. But whatever they build, it's, you know, a dollar late and what do you say? It's too late, basically, because the Supreme Court already is stacked with 6 conservatives who are going to be there for at least another decade, in my opinion.
And
so.
I think the model's just tough because it's like the model is, it's not something that we all pitch in for, right? Like the model of a federalist society for the Democratic Party would be something wealthy people are paying for that is covering this stuff, and that's a model that like wealthy people are never going to do for the left.
Yeah, and I just to jump in here too, I would also, you know, along with the money, want to point out that going the legal, sort of like the law route can be a double-edged sword, because we know that the law in this country is extremely conservative, and a lot of going that route. I'm sorry, there's a little bit of background noise on the caller side thing. But yeah, no, I think a lot of trying to go through that route, the bureaucratic route, the route that like emphasizes the role of like high paid lawyers and, you know, whether they be nonprofit or like leftist, really ignores that a lot of what the right was doing over the past 50 years was also grassroots direct action activism. And it worked in tandem with these legal apparati that the right wing billionaires or the evangelical group billionaires were, you know, also working with in order to create a general culture where the degradation of women's rights was more likely to happen. Where on the left side, or Democratic side rather, the Democrats aren't investing in any kind of like legal long-term game, and they're also, you know, poo-pooing the idea that you should be involved in any sort of direct action that's not the most polite or nice direct action of like writing letters to your senator, you know, begging for your rights. You know, they just want you to vote, and that's not how the right ensured that they got women's rights removed. So I certainly don't think it's going to be the way we get women's rights in this country, or just general rights in this country, expanded. It never really has been.
Right.
All right.
Well,
Well,
look what we just. I mean, this wasn't too surprising, but look what Rolling Stone just uncovered yesterday.
Yes.
That, all the evangelicals had to do was get their leaders to pray alongside the Supreme Court justices. And boom, bada bing.
Appreciate the call, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's turn to the bigger news of the day. This that Boris Johnson has resigned. So, here is the Labor MP talking to Boris Johnson. Was this yesterday?
Yeah, I believe this was yesterday.
And, yeah, so he resigned today, and it was really a done deal. Sorry?
I mean, after yesterday, he was like, Boris was really, what you see here is basically Boris putting up a brave face in the face of an entire government collapsing around him. And in this clip here, you have a Labor MP telling him that actually a bunch of your ministers are ready to pull the plug on this and say you need to go. And I'm reminded of when H.W. Bush and a bunch of other, like Gerald Ford and those types of Republicans told Nixon, it's like, bro.
Yeah.
Come on.
Right.
So that's what we're seeing here.
He can save a little bit of face here, but you can see his heart breaking in real time.
It's being reported that there's a delegation of your cabinet colleagues waiting in Downing Street, including the chief whip, the transport secretary, and your new chancellor. waiting to tell you when you finish here today that it's time for you to go. How will you respond to that?
Darren, you're asking me to comment on
this conversation will happen in a few minutes, Prime Minister.
So you say, but if you want to ask about what we're doing to help people with the cost of living, if you want to ask about what we're doing to build more clean, green energy supply, which this committee has taken an interest in.
That's going to be your answer to the cabinet colleagues in Downing Street.
Then I'm very happy to talk to you about it, but I'm not going to give a running commentary on political events. We're going to get on with the government of the country.
And you will not be getting on with the governing of the country anymore because he stood outside and resigned today to boos from the crowd. There was a prankster who played the Benny Hill theme song in the background, which was incredibly amusing. But yeah, he's gone, and like I understand people celebrating this, but he's just going to get replaced by another Tory whose politics are identical. He just may not be this brand of loathsome.
It feels like it's so Trump, like, right? Like the celebration of him being gone. Well, it's like you got these other freaks still here, and it's even worse because like Keir Starmer, somehow still in charge of the Labour Party as like just a second version of the Liberal Democrats. It seems like. So what we're gonna have now is just a new Tory, I guess.
Yeah.
Like I mean, that's another absolute freak. Like I don't know what we're. It's a strange thing, and we have this moment where it's like, oh, we got rid of the constitutional crisis has been averted because we didn't have to go to the Queen to tell the Prime Minister to leave. Well, it's like maybe you should have. Maybe you should have a constitutional crisis. Like maybe it's time for one of those.
You could have broken out the Ouija board and got the Queen's opinion on what to do about Boris. I will say
you could go bow down in front of her hologram and then ask for advice. Go on, sorry.
No, I was gonna say that's the nicest I've ever seen his hair. Like he actually ran a comb through it like today for his resignation, and I guess good for him. If you got to do it for one day of your career, do it for your resignation. But I will correct you. They were not booing. They were saying boo-oris, obviously the classic, the classic liberal, or should I say leftist trick of misrepresenting what happened. They were cheering him in his dignity of leaving office.
And his crowd size was bigger than Obama's too.
Huge.
I didn't know this until today, actually. I didn't realize this, but Boris Johnson was actually born in New York City, on the Upper East Side or Upper West Side. I forget which, but he was born in New York City. So I think this is a great opportunity for him to come on over to the U.S. We need someone who is, the Republican Party, I should say, is looking for a Trump that maybe doesn't have all the insurrection baggage of Trump. He could make a go for it, maybe from Prime Minister over there to the President of the United States over here.
We could swap Boris and Trump like the Nets and Sixers swapped Harden and
Simmons. Yeah. Your trash for our trash.
Winston Churchill was also born in America.
Oh wow. Like a wife swap situation.
That is who Boris Johnson fashions himself as. So.
Of course.
Naturally. Someone just wrote in and said, "Where's the Fun Half link this week?" So. I don't know what the workflow is on that because I don't know anything. But I'll read some IMs and then
it'll be in the. I mean, it's in the normal places on YouTube where it is, and it'll be in the blog posts soon.
Right. All right. Warren from Toronto. Emma, who you got first overall in the NHL draft today? Hoping my Habs take right, but I also think Slav and Cooley will turn out pretty good too. Also glad we got Jeff Gordon from your Rangers after Dolan fired them. Yeah, so I didn't really. You're from Toronto, Warren, and you're a Canadiens fan. That's interesting. But that probably good for you because the Leafs are such a train wreck for the most part. But yeah, no, I hadn't been paying too much to the NHL draft because the Rangers lost their first round pick in that trade for Andrew Kopp. Because they made it to the conference finals and it was conditional, so I'm not losing sleep over that. But yeah, I don't know enough about the prospects, honestly, to answer that. It seems like it's a weaker year than people realize, and from what I've seen, I don't think Shane Wright is the slam dunk prospect that a few others have been. I would say I think Lafreniere is going to be better, Jack Hughes. So I don't know. I think going with Shane Wright, though, Canadian kid, probably the best bet for the Canadians. Attorney Andrew, want to push back on something Emma said. The time horizon for the end of this right-wing court is not 10 years because conservatives strategically retire and because they know why they're there. It is likely no one is listening to the show will live to see a non-conservative majority on the court. All right. Well, thank you for that, Andrew. Yes. Maybe I was being optimistic about 10 years and hoping like someone like Thomas or Alito would die by that time. Dumb and Poor. I can see how people take Ben Shabibo and Jordan Peterson seriously with how their voices sound. Like they appeal to the same group that loves projecting traditional men and shit like that. How the F did people who fetishize big scary men worship dudes who sound like a whiny 10-year-old in Kermit the Frog?
It's remarkable.
They see themselves in them, for the most part.
I find the Kermit thing to be endearing. I think that if he, like I say all the time, if he didn't go down this weird path, he would be a very good college professor. People would love that class. Like, oh, the professor who sounds like Kermit. It'd be really easy to remember the information. But that's certainly
endearing.
not,
That's endearing for people like us, I guess, who think it's funny and interesting. But like, his target audience should hate him for not being a manly man. Yet they seem to follow his words. I mean, really, it shows that their problem isn't with like the professorial class of like college.
Yes.
It's not that. They just wanted one for themselves. They wanted an intellectual who appealed to them. Like, they still want that trope of an intellectual, which Jordan Peterson gladly fills, but they wanted that to be someone who speaks to them, and that's where Peterson comes in.
That's why they want their own celebrities too, right? Like, they hate that the left has the dominates the celebrity culture. Or
excuse you, they got John Voight. How dare you, Emma?
Oh, I'm sorry. And I forgot about Kirk Cameron.
Right. Right.
Although they probably have Chris Pratt. So that's definitely their biggest guy, I think.
I don't know. Chris Pratt recently came out in an interview saying how he doesn't understand why everyone thinks he's so religious. He hates religion. It causes all these problems, which might have been something he was told to say from his manager. But
that conflicts a little with him going on like every talk show talking about how much he loves Jesus, posting crosses on his Instagram, etc.
Right, but then if that's the case, he has kowtowed to the woke mob, which means he is not a good right-wing representative of a celebrity.
Good point.
Oh yeah, no, they need you to be like really right-wing. The fact that academia and Hollywood are obviously both conservative is not enough. They need you to be like War on Christmas conservative level. Chris Pratt knows what side his bread is buttered on, and he wants to be in Guardians of the Galaxy 17, so he's gonna apologize.
Yeah,
and they're mad at that. Like, John Voight's over. Kirk Cameron is doing Christmas movies for the Hallmark Channel. I guess they have Sabrina the Teenage Witch. I mean, that's a good get.
Right. With James Woods, who is in a few movies which I enjoy, but his career is over. But pretty much. But yeah, that's
Yeah. Oh, Tim Allen, Marcadia wrote in. That's probably their biggest guy, even though he just got cut out of the Buzz Lightyear movie. Sucks to suck.
Right, but they love that the Buzz Lightyear movie apparently didn't do so well in the movie theaters. They love that because it means that people turned away from groomer Disney trying to show people a 0.03 second same-sex peck on the lips between a couple. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Tim Allen didn't voice Buzz Lightyear in the cartoon show. Patrick Warburton did. I made sure to look that up before I said it because I wasn't necessarily sure. And so, like, I don't think of like the movie Buzz Lightyear's voice. I think of Patrick Warburton, like Buzz Lightyear Star Command. They should have gotten him.
Right. Well, yeah. The whole issue was for the real reason is that no one understood it for the most part. Where the hell that movie fit in. Buzz Lightyear didn't look like Buzz Lightyear because it wasn't the toy. It was Buzz Lightyear, the person, and it was supposed to be the movie that Andy saw, which made him want to get the Buzz Lightyear toy. So it was just a weird thing people didn't understand. So that's probably why the movie didn't.
They should have just done a shot-for-shot remake of Dune.
And Toy Story took place in the 90s, and yet like the movie he saw had like a gay couple in it. That's like the most unrealistic part.
Right. Yes, that's a great point too. Yes.
Yeah, I don't know why Pixar's doing that. I know like they want to make money, but they have the clout to do anything original that they want. So I wish they'd steer away from that kind of stuff. And I will go see whatever they come out with next.
It was either Buzz Lightyear or like Cars 4, so I can't necessarily agree that they're not hit or miss anymore, but certainly I would have seen Cars 4 over Buzz Lightyear.
Right. Also, Disney's been putting all their stuff until Lightyear because of the pandemic. For the past like 2 years, they've been putting all their stuff up on Disney Plus for free. Like that's where I saw Turning Red, the Pixar movie that came out before Lightyear, and Turning Red is fantastic. I would have paid for that. But Lightyear, being that I saw Turning Red for free, I was like, oh, I took my kids to the movies this past weekend. We saw the new Minions movie because I knew Lightyear was going to be on Disney Plus soon.
I can't believe you actually saw that Minions movie. I heard it was like absolutely terrible. But did your kids like it? Because the Minions are fun.
The kids liked it. Yes, that's the thing. That's who it's for, you know.
Yeah,
Although there was that whole TikTok meme that blew up with the teens. You heard about that?
I
did. Gentle Minions thing. Where we had a few in our movie theater who luckily did not cause a ruckus until the movie was over. But they were dressed in full like suit and tie. Watching the Minions movie.
It's amazing.
I'm glad kids nowadays have fun.
They're like 16.
I would say they were like 16, 17. Yeah, like late teens. Yeah.
I gotta say, like, it seems so lame to me. Like when I was 16, I'm not going.
You have to remember, Despicable Me came out like when these kids were like 8, 9 years old.
Yeah.
So they're seeing a
right,
show.
But Harry
a movie
Potter
that
came out. Harry Potter came out when I was young, and I still wouldn't have done it.
It's ironic. They're making fun of the Minions, so they're dressing up and going.
So they don't enjoy the film at all.
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. All right,
They were quietly
also
watching
strange.
it though, so who knows? I don't know. The kids in my theater might have actually enjoyed
Maybe.
it.
Calling
What
from
do you-
Oh, sorry, Brandon.
No. Let's do the call first. My question was off topic, sort of.
Okay, calling from a 423 area code. Who's this? Where you're calling from?
Can you hear me?
Phone's up.
Hello?
Oh, hi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, who's this?
Hi, my name's Ryan from Tennessee.
Ryan from Tennessee. What's on your mind?
Hi, I wanted to bring up a story that came out in our local papers last week in regards to our police department.
Sure.
It was reported in the Johnson City Press and a few other local media sources like WJHL about the local police department. They're being sued by a U.S. attorney by being fired. According to the Johnson City Press article, our police department fired our attorney investigator that was pressing the police department to investigate serial rape claims that were being by a local business owner. According to the Johnson City Press article, we had a local business owner that was serially raping women from local bars, and it's pretty horrific. The article had at least 7 women that had come forward to the U.S. attorney, and she was pressing the Johnson City Police Department to investigate these claims. Out of the 7 women, one of them even fell out of this business owner's 5th-story condo, fell out of the balcony and survived somehow, and tried to explain to police department regarding these serial rape allegations. The police department refused to investigate any of these rape allegations. The article even included one woman who woke up in his condo and tried to explain to the police about what happened. They just ignored her claims. The U.S. attorney tried to get our police department to investigate these claims, but the article also say that they would look at video footage and pretty much just resorted to throwing the allegations away based on the clothing the women were wearing and how they were looked. And after the U.S. attorney kept pressuring our police department to investigate these claims, they fired the U.S. attorney, and she is suing our police department because of the unjust firing. what gets even worse is after further pressing, they finally did get approval to arrest that local business owner that was being accused. Apparently, the Johnson City Police Department tipped him off, and he is currently on the run from the police department.
What?
Yes.
Johnson City Police.
Yes, you can. It's in the Johnson City Press wrote a big article about it last week, and there's a bunch of articles about the lady who survived after falling out of this balcony, and she's been screaming for years about trying to get this investigated, and they just swept it all under the rug. And then after they tipped him off, he ran away. And then after they went into his apartment, they found a literal rape list full of at least, it was like 20-something women that he had on this list. And he is currently on the run. And then now, so now Johnson City Police Department is being sued for, I don't know how much. It's just something worth looking into because it's a major story around here, but I haven't really seen any national coverage of it whatsoever.
Well, I'm looking at, one, we should clip this, if we can write a note about this, but two, when I'm looking up these articles, it's just about like the lawsuit against the police department as opposed to just the entirety of this case, which is crazy. I mean, we opened up the show basically talking about how you can't trust cops and giving cops more funds and resources as a way to combat mass gun violence in this country is not going to end well. Like, I feel like there's this cognitive dissonance, probably with mostly just like white people in this country who don't want to reckon with the fact that these kinds of criminal actions and getting away with it on a mass scale is the norm in a lot of police departments. They lie as a habit, and like, frankly, there are criminal cops because, like, a lot of criminal cops because there are people drawn to that profession who like the concept of putting on a uniform and inherently being more powerful than other people when they're in that interaction. And that draws in bullies, people who want to use that power for what they want in other instances. And that's what rape is. Rape is all about power. So it makes sense that this is what, how this manifests itself. But wow, that is an incredible story. I really appreciate you calling in about that and calling our attention to it.
Yeah, like that Johnson City Press article is really long, but it talks about, like, apparently he was being investigated as a massive coke dealer in the area. That's how, because he has a really thick condo downtown, and he owns this. Well, I guess he doesn't own it anymore since he left. But he had like this big garage downtown because it's a college town. There's bars everywhere downtown. So he had like big Lamborghinis and like all kinds of sports cars in his garage, and he would take these women to his garage and then drug them and take them to his condo. And I guess the police knew about it the whole time because there's just no telling how many women come forward with this U.S. attorney, and they just refuse to investigate anything. And it is absolutely horrific, including that woman who somehow survived falling out of that fifth-story condo, and they still didn't do anything about it. And it is absolutely horrific. But if you want to look at that Johnson City Press article, it has all the details in there. But it's really bad.
All right. Well, I appreciate the call. Thanks so much, Ryan. Thanks for calling that to our attention.
Okay. All right. Have a good day.
You too. Okay. That was disturbing, but...
I mean, I think just to...
Yeah, go on.
Well, I know I'll definitely ask my question after. It's still going to be inappropriate. But no, to your earlier point, I think that just semi-related to what the caller called in about is just the sort of dark epidemic or shadow epidemic of like police sexual misconduct allegations that comprise like the second most, or rather, police sexual misconduct allegations or allegations against police of sexual misconduct by citizens is the second most populous type of misconduct they are charged of by the citizens, beyond excessive force. And we're very familiar with the images and the videos and the stories of people who are subject to excessive force by the police, because that conversation has been happening and being normalized since, really forever. But I think of the Rodney King beating as like the sort of like the modern day tipping point of that. But this sort of epidemic of police sexual misconduct, which often occurs or rather includes victims who are younger than 18, is something we don't talk about. And I think a lot of that has to do with the way we propagandize and defend our police from the sort of negative public relations that occur from their crimes and the allegations of their crimes. And it's a lot harder to, just by nature of how our society treats violence against minorities versus how it conceptualizes violence against women. In some ways, I think it would be more difficult for the white population who looks towards the cops to be their savior from, the dark jungles of the urban centers. If you also know that these cops were like rapists and, pedophiles, it would make you even less likely to believe that they are doing the right thing.
100%. All right, let's do this Brittany Griner story because I feel like we need to give this a little more attention. Brittany Griner pled guilty today in Russia to drug charges. I don't know what the implications of that are for the WNBA star, but really it's because the Russian authorities are using her as a pawn in the tension between the United States and Russia over Russia's invasion of Ukraine and subsequent war in Ukraine. But so she's a political prisoner because they found empty cartridges in her luggage that contained cannabis oil, and they're using that as a way, or the detention of her as a way to, increase hostilities and or leverage with the United States. But she's been in detention for a really, really long time, and NBA stars like Carmelo Anthony and others have been speaking out about her detention. Here is Brittany Griner's wife calling out Biden for the inaction because her wife has been in prison for so long, and obviously this is an incredibly scary situation.
I was told, just we're going to try and reserve, we're going to try and handle this behind scenes and, let's not raise her value and, stay quiet. And, I did that. And respectfully, we're over 140 days at this point. That does not work. And so I will not be quiet anymore. I will find that balance of, harm versus help in pushing our government to do everything that's possible, because being quiet, they are not moving. They are not doing anything. And so my wife is struggling, and we have to help her.
Sherelle, a lot of us feel the same way that you do. We all want her home sooner rather than later. Before you go, have you heard from the White House since the letter was delivered to President Biden? In her letter, she says the first time she voted was in 2020, and that vote was for President Biden. Have you heard from him?
I still have not heard from him, and honestly, it's very disheartening.
How? This is an incredibly high-profile case, just from his own political perspective. Brittany Griner's a famous WNBA player. She competed in the Olympics for the United States. How do you not cover your bases and your own ass from just a political perspective and reach out to her wife? Make a phone call. He's too busy making calls with Mitch McConnell, trying to make a deal where he gets, fairy dust back from Mitch McConnell to put an anti-abortion judge on and appointing him to a federal appointment that lasts a lifetime in the middle of Roe being overturned. He's too busy sitting beside Nancy Pelosi, maybe taking a nap, as she helps write fundraising emails.
Too busy covering for IDF murders of journalists.
How does this fall through the cracks? The idea that her wife I want to get her name. What is it? I can't hear you.
Sherelle.
Okay, Sherelle. The idea that Sherelle waited this long to even speak out about this is I would not have that patience.
Well,
I'd be up in arms every day.
Yeah, that's the thing here is now we have two instances of basketball players. First, the NBA with the George Floyd protests, and this time with the WNBA and Brittany Griner, where their initial inclination is to speak out, and they are told not to do that. And that was the case with Griner. It was don't make too many waves. We got this. And of course they don't. They don't got this. And so they shouldn't be trustworthy. And this should be a lesson for any sort of, whether you're in professional sports or any sort of area where you have a social justice platform, to not trust these people.
Also,
I think like
they don't want to raise her value. I mean, I understand that line of thinking for someone who is just who isn't in the public eye, but do they not think that Russia knows exactly who they have? I mean, that's probably why they're doing this. That's probably why they're dragging this out to make her, an example. I mean, this isn't a person that they're unfamiliar with. There is no, keep this on the DL here.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think, to Matt's point, like most things, or rather like most important things, Democrats are going to have to be shamed into doing something about this, basically anything about it. And then once they've been appropriately shamed to the point where they are forced to do something, then they'll take responsibility and pretend like they had, they just did it through the goodness of their own heart. But I mean, you have to be prepared for that. You have to be prepared for that as like a social justice advocate or as anyone who wants nice things in America to happen, to just be prepared to shame the shit out of Democrats and the media until they eventually are willing to pretend like it was their idea.
Yeah, if they're talking about themselves as your partner before they've actually delivered on what you're partnering with them for, you need to be really wary.
Yeah.
Also, we should point out why she's even over there in the first place, playing for the league over there, because I believe she gets paid something like $200K a season. Compare that to like and she's like a big name in the WNBA. Compare that to like a low-level NBA player who makes millions, I'm sure. I mean, it's pretty. That's another issue this brings up too.
The instincts of the Biden administration, in order to cower from any headline, like any headline that they could perceive as painting them in a negative light, or any sort of pressure outside of like the strength of their diplomatic processes or internal negotiations, is mind-boggling. That's what happens when you're the president. He's supposed to be using the bully pulpit and his ability with the immense platform that he has to sell his agenda, whatever the case may be. And like, I don't know what the status of the negotiations are with the United States basically backing Ukraine in some sort of negotiation with Russia and peace deals, and if that has anything to do with it. But like, as you mentioned, Matt, this is already a story that has commanded people's attention. And the fact that he didn't even do behind the scenes due diligence by speaking and reaching out to her wife totally undercuts the fact that this is some sort of strategic move. It's just ambivalence and cowardice.
Oh, it's definitely apathy, but I think people on the outside who are, conditioned to give the Democratic Party and their president a lot of, I don't know what you call it, a lot of just like leeway when it comes to this sort of thing, are willing to believe that any decision like this is strategic. And that's just because, it's very easy to imagine Republicans throwing a fit about, Biden talking to Russia and he's showing weakness, et cetera, et cetera. And that's certainly not why they actually do it, but it's definitely a good excuse for people who like to believe that they're always playing like 8-dimensional chess, or who watch too much West Wing.
Yeah. Jules Winfield, if he calls after Sherelle, he'd need to call the family of every person's family who has someone in custody in Russia and other countries we have diplomatic relations with. Otherwise, on Fox, they'll say he's only willing to help leftists, because from the right's point of view, anyone gay or black is leftist. Biden administration is terrified of right media. It's
cool,
disgusting.
do it. They don't care. Like, we're the ones who Biden should be worried about upsetting.
And honestly,
Biden is
I don't even think they would attack him about this.
It would be a fart in the bathtub.
And I just don't necessarily agree that Democrats are terrified of right media. I think that sort of makes sense if you don't realize that the Republicans don't vote for Democrats. But for Democrats who want to believe that the Republicans are always on the table, the idea that they're going to be demonized by the right for things that they did versus things that they did not do, which they're going to be demonized for anyway, like, sounds like a really big deal. Like, what if that one suburban mom who was about to vote for Biden the next election, is turned off by him getting Brittany Griner out of Russian jail? What if that happens? And it's just like, they certainly aren't making that calculation, but it creates a very compelling narrative for some people who are, trying to run the numbers in their head.
Right. But also, if that suburban mom is watching right-wing media of any kind, from Fox News to Breitbart to Daily Wire to Gateway Pundit, they're not voting for Biden. Like, the attainable suburban white mom voter, to the extent that there is one, is someone who's just like sort of completely cut off from this whole bubble to begin with. They're not taking in political media.
I agree, and I think we'll really be able to tell like how little Biden cares about the situation if and when he appoints Kamala Harris to be the czar of this, of getting Brittany Griner out of prison, because that's like the Biden administration's telltale sign of like not really being into something, putting Kamala Harris in charge of it.
I know, right? They really just like, and to my great amusement, give her the scut jobs. JB Davis 65 writes in, I live in Bristol, Virginia, which is 24 miles from Johnson City. TV news media is less than forthcoming about the truth in these issues. The woman who fell, ? From the window is also suing the JCPD. I can attest to the truth about this. Good to know.
Goodness.
Professional dumpster fire. Happy majority report Thursday, guys. I have a question for Matt Binder if he's on today, or maybe you all can answer in his absence. Are there any organizations? He is here.
I'll answer.
Yeah, he's here, but we're going to give this to Brandon. Just kidding. Are there any organizations keeping tabs on right-wing extremist cells that would be willing to work with progressive organizations like DSA to help keep demonstrations and other direct actions events safe? Given the likely right-wing terror attack at the Georgia Guidestones yesterday, I'm concerned the QAnon crowd are going to start accelerating their death cult and try to amp up extreme violent outbursts. This is the second explosion caused by a Q-affiliated group in 2 years, AT&T explosion in Nashville on Christmas of 2020. At what point does the group decide that progressive protest or socialist meeting is also the work of Satan? A caller made a plea yesterday for more people to get involved at the local level to help push the progressive agenda, and I agree with them wholeheartedly, but I think it's malpractice of us to not think that right-wing extremists will target anything Democrat and beyond for violence, and we should be working to mitigate these risks if we can, and I'm sorry if I'm a downer. Left is best.
Right. I don't know. I'm not familiar with any specific like one organization or group that like tracks the daily or like the weekly events going on in the right, or what they're planning to counter protest or anything. People locally in the grassroots usually have a better idea than anything I've ever seen online, like as like a warning from someone on like a tracking on like a national level or something like that. There's a number of great journalists and citizen journalists and reporters who you can follow. Like if you're on the West Coast, Left Coast Right Watch is a good one. There's a number of different organizations like that popping up. I've seen one that's like specific for Arizona, but like in terms of like one big organization or even like a few that are tracking nationally, I'm not familiar with that. Maybe that's not the best way to do it either. Maybe that's why there hasn't been one that does that. There are like these like sort of local groups still popping up.
We have an IMer write-in saying Dianne Feinstein says she supports abortion but won't commit to making a filibuster exemption. We might have an article on that. Let me find it. But I mean, did she even say that? Like, I would love to see a video of her talking and saying that.
I mean, it's pretty clear that if they say those two things together, then one isn't true. Like, you cannot support one and not support doing the other. It's incompatible, which means you actually don't support the abortion rights and do whatever you can.
And the most charitable interpretation is that you support Senate norms over abortion rights. And that is an absolutely untenable and immoral position.
Yeah, I want to shout out AOC for saying a carve out for the filibuster is not enough. The filibuster needs to be gone.
Yeah.
It's not about one single issue. It needs to be gone because it is a relic of the slave master Senate.
Yeah, it is a way to tamp down the unruly House, which is way more directly representative, and we still have gerrymandering and all of that. But the House is at the very least somewhat representative of to the degree that it can be in our like fake democracy right now of the people. The Senate just they're gatekeepers for progress, and that's what the filibuster is there for.
Not even that. It's always been anti-democratic, but since they don't even have to stay and talk the entire time anymore, like it's gotten lazy too.
Yeah.
They have allowed them to not just turn the filibuster into an excuse for nothing to ever get done, but they don't even have to like interrupt their weekend. It's disgusting.
Let's turn to this Marjorie Taylor Greene clip here. Here's Marjorie Taylor Greene on MTG Live, which is her podcast.
Magic the Gathering.
Right. I mean, with some of the things she says, it is a very fantastical world she's living in. So, I mean,
here's Marjorie Taylor Greene streaming WoW on Twitch and shit talking. No, I mean, like it's the logo is very daytime talk show. But like all of these politicians are trying to have their own shows now. We had
Ted Cruz has one with Michael Knowles.
Josh Hawley has one, I believe, where he just talks about how porn is really scary. But Marjorie Taylor Greene uses her platform as a way to peddle what brought her to the House in the first place, which is conspiracy theories straight out of the Alex Jones playbook. Here she is suggesting that the July 4th shootings were maybe false flags.
Now, here's what I have to say. I mean, 2 shootings on July 4th, one in a rich white neighborhood and the other at a fireworks display. It almost sounds like it's designed to persuade Republicans to go along with more gun control. I mean, after all, remember, we didn't see that happen at all the pride parades in the month of June, but as soon as we hit MAGA month, as soon as we hit the month that we're all celebrating, loving our country, we have shootings on July 4th. I mean, that's, that would sound like a conspiracy theory, right? Of course. But what's the definition of a right-wing conspiracy theory? Well, by the way, it's the news that's just 6 months early.
I mean, I'm gonna tap my mana here to reply to MTG. That was a Magic the Gathering reference.
Okay.
Yeah,
I am surrounded by dorks.
Wizards of the Coast have got to sue her over this. Like,
Right.
she's gonna do terrible for their brand.
Also, I love the aesthetic. It's like her logo looks like one of those like women-centric like daytime talk shows.
Yes.
It's like I don't associate her with that style, to be quite frank. But there it is. But it seemed like she was a little bit upset that this didn't happen at a pride parade.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that was really bizarre. Right.
Well, maybe we should pull up the Patriot Front white supremacist group, which was thwarted, dozens of them at who were in the back of a U-Haul in Idaho, going there to beat up and attack people in the LGBTQ pride event. I mean, that's just one thing.
Yeah. Also, this kid was apparently I've seen people in Highland Park. Maybe this needs to be verified, but I think a Trump supporter. Yeah, and also like you could also say it's a Jewish neighborhood, but you said it's a white neighborhood. I also like that Marjorie Taylor Greene acknowledges that Republicans are wealthy. Like, it's a wealthy neighborhood.
No, it's because it's predominantly Jewish. That's why she's saying something like that, I think. I mean, I don't know.
I think it's, I don't know. I think she associates themselves with, I mean, she's a business owner.
Maybe. I mean, I'm always like looking for like anti-Semitic coded language in her because she's the queen of, talking about globalists. So maybe I'm reading too much into it. But she also said on that same show, sorry if I cut you off, Binder, but she also said on that same show that that the shooter, because the shooter dressed like a woman to escape or try to evade authorities, she was making some sort of dog whistle about this shooter also like being trans. So I think like but this fits into like her larger the conspiracy theory that she in particular is trying to foment. She tried it first with the Uvalde shooter, circulating those fake 4chan posts that said that the shooter was trans, which it was just a random trans woman, not the shooter itself, himself in Uvalde. And the fact that the shooter dresses in women's clothes to try to get away, and you pair that with the fact that she's saying like, why didn't this happen at pride events, huh? And all of the emphasis on mental health. Their latest conspiracy that's brewing is that these are all mentally ill trans people who are gunning down, or people who have those kinds of proclivities who are gunning down others. I don't know. That's what I see.
Well, there's a few things I want to address here. Oh, wait, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you, Brandon. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say they have to come up with some, both explanation and way to obfuscate how many mass shootings there are in this country, because there are just so many. There have been almost 340 mass shootings already this year. So on average, there are like over almost 2 a day in this country. So there's nothing suspicious about a mass shooting happening on July 4th. Statistically speaking, that happens every day in America. It's just like you have to like make all these carve outs to make it seem like these are anomalous events, because it's like the only country where like guaranteed every day there's going to be a mass shooting in this country.
Right. And there's a few things I wanted to address here. The second I saw the cops in their press conference say that the shooter was dressed as a woman, I knew the right was going to run with some sort of trans cross-dressing drag queen angle. I mean, I do think in the way that the police actually referenced it, I think it's fair to mention. I don't think that's what they were trying to do. But I knew the right was going to run with it. And the media ran with it too. I saw the New York Times putting that in the lead of their reporting, that this guy was wearing women's clothing, as if that was the most relevant part. Yes, it's important to mention, but it's not the lead of the story. I mean, it's pretty clear based on what we know that he was planning on going somewhere else and doing another shooting, possibly in Wisconsin, that he was wearing women's clothing because he actually wanted to escape. And what better way to escape than to change what you look like completely? So that's why he was wearing women's clothing. He wasn't trans or anything having to do with his gender identity or anything. Bank robbers wear pantyhose over their head. So that was not surprising to see them run with that. But also, the reason probably why there was this shooting, I mean, first of all, that's completely wrong. That like we just saw less than 2 months ago, a shooter in New York State drive 9 hours out of the way to target Black people because that's specifically what his ideology told him to go and kill and inflict pain on. But also, there are shooters like the shooter from Highland Park, and I would say he's a lot like, in some ways, the Uvalde school shooter who just looking to hurt anybody and inflict pain on anyone. And so, what's the easiest place for them to go? Somewhere local, and that's what we know. The Uvalde shooter lived in the area. The Highland Park shooter, his dad is like a community, known community figure in the area. They have roots there. So that's the case and why they chose those areas. I mean, the reason probably to disappoint Marjorie Taylor Greene that there wasn't some shooting at a pride parade or something. Thank God there wasn't. But to answer that question, it's probably because in the places where there were pride parades, they probably have stricter gun laws because they happen in more liberal areas. I mean, strictly speaking, I mean, that's just one guess off the top of my head. And a lot of these shooters, unless they're driven by some sort of radical white supremacist ideology, they're kind of lazy and just go for whatever's closest.
And by the way, this is like very similar to, I just remembered the specifics of some of what she said about false flags in the past. One, she, harassed all of the kids from some of the kids from Parkland, and pretended it was a false flag. But this was also the same argument that she made for the massacre in Vegas, because it was at a country music festival, targeting conservatives, targeting people who are going to vote conservative so that they support gun control. But then why hasn't that happened yet, Marjorie Taylor Greene? Why has there been no gun control since any of these massacres? And yes, I am not counting whatever BS that this bipartisan group of 20 came up with in the Senate that only empowers law enforcement to do more and does really nothing to target the manufacturing and sale of these kinds of assault weapons, which is exactly what we need to do. Nothing has happened yet, and yet she's still recycling the same conspiracy theories she used before.
That's the other thing, though, that she's incorrect about. Republicans do support gun control, broadly speaking. People who identify as Republican, when you survey them, they support gun control. Not as much or as it's not as popular with them as it is with Democrats and independents, but it's definitely over a majority of Republicans support gun control. This is a very small minority, even of the Republican Party, who is just against every single gun control legislation. They just happen to be very vocal, and they happen to make up like a very radical base that has been empowered over generations by the Republican Party. But her, like, this idea that every mass shooting in America has to be a false flag is, either a strategy of hers or just like a coping mechanism to, explain how this is the best country in the world, but this is also the only country where this stuff happens. Like a lot of Americans are in deep, deep denial about how anomalous our mass shooting culture is in this country and how it's uniquely tied to things that are uniquely American. And that's why they're always looking for ways to make it seem not that bad or excuses to make it seem not as prevalent. Like when there was just a shooting in Copenhagen and every right winger was out there going like, oh, you see, I thought gun violence didn't happen anywhere else. It's like, it doesn't. Like, that's just an anomaly. You have identified an anomaly that happens very infrequently in other countries and are trying to prove a point that it just happens everywhere, when in reality, they've had less gun deaths in Denmark in the past 50 years. And I mean, we had 68 mass shootings in June alone.
Yeah.
Like 68 during the month of Pride, month before 67. Who knows how many it'll be in July before it's over, but some people have to find a way to square that circle where like this is the best country in the world, but it's also the only country where you might just be shot walking around, even if it's not like the most likely thing that would happen to you.
All right. Johnny Johnson. Chris Pratt's brother is a 3%er and a cop who sells wood carvings on the side. A lot of those carvings have the 3%er emblem on them, and Chris promotes his brother's store on social media channels semi-regularly. So yeah, not great. Yeah, he's a right-winger. He just has to hide it a little bit. Miguel. Hi, Emma. Great interview. I'm completely on board with the topic of consumption versus production that the interviewer and you discussed. However, I take issue with both of your tones towards individuals. Believing the science might very well be a way for PMCs to deflect, but is popular amongst normal people and even normal people who aren't well off or middle class in my experience, because denying the science has been the strategy of the right for as long as I can remember. People have decided to make personal choices for climate change because it's the only actionable choice many people have been given over the last 20 years while nothing happened politically. Acknowledging this would bring more people in while we move to a better strategy. I don't know if it would bring more people in.
There's
Miguel?
a problem with the framing, because when you say we believe the science, you suggest the problem is lack of belief in other people rather than a concerted and pointed resistance to the actual facts by the powerful.
And I make individual consumption choices that I'm trying to reduce certain, parts of my behavior that might be environmentally unfriendly. But at the same time, I find emphasizing that to be like, what do I like? How do I, like my potatoes, right? I prefer them as fries or as mashed. Like, these are individual choices you can find. You can make those choices in your individual life. But when that supersedes large policy action that challenges capitalists and oil companies, that is a problem. And that's frankly what the focus has been by many of the Democrats. And so I think trying to root that out of our discourse is better. Happy if you have the ability and the financial security to make those kinds of choices. But when you are emphasizing that, it also boxes out working class people who don't have the flexibility to like make choices about their consumption to the degree that you might be able to. So that's why I think from a political matter, it is not the right way to go. White Communist says, so scientists and educated people are bad now? Sounds like Khmer Rogue, but not in the good leftist way.
That's a insane misreading.
Hammering scientists and educated people is also what fascists and authoritarians do. PMC critique is what oligarchs and capitalists would invent to replace actual class analysis. Someone on the left, ironically educated people, hadn't already invented it. PMC blaming is the narcissism of minor differences. It's the opposite of class analysis, obsessed with the personality signifiers and trivial in-group signaling that it claims to oppose.
I don't think so. I think it's concerned with how certain groups of society shape certain conversations. And I think, like, the thing is there's no poor people involved in these conversations. And it's very clear, like, when you talk about, maybe what we all need to do is take less vacations to Europe.
Yeah.
The motherfuckers aren't taking vacations to Europe.
All right, let's take a call. Calling from an 818 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, what's up, guys? It's Dave from Jamaica. How are you doing?
Dave, what's up?
Not much, but broken toes. But you know.
Broken toes.
Yeah.
What happened?
You know, workplace incident.
Oh man.
Workplace incident.
I'm sorry.
So, yeah. So I think my call today was going to kind of be focused on my dislike of small business because when it comes to like workplace injuries and so on and so forth, there's a lot of pressure for employees, especially when the people say we're a family here and so on, and people get very nervous when it comes to asking for stuff like sick leave and so on because of the small workplace environment. People feel pressured, like, oh, if I take this sick leave, they're going to have me up in the books, and then I can't find another job, and so on and so. And I see a lot of that happening with small businesses.
Absolutely.
Not mine
Absolutely.
in particular, but I've had that experience in past workplaces.
Everyone I
And-
know who's worked at a small business, like a restaurant that wasn't a chain, or a store that wasn't a chain, it's always been the most miserable experience. They treat you like garbage. They don't let you. They understaff, so they don't let you take off when you need to take off. It's it's not. This is not a like saying big business and corporations are great, but they do tend, in my experience, and honestly, for most people I've heard from, I know Matt Brunig usually makes jokes about this, but he really believes it, and I believe it too. They do treat their workers better in terms of, definitely when compared with small businesses. Are there exceptions to the rule? Sure, but a lot of small business owners are tyrants, honestly, and they treat their workers
Small biz tyrants, yeah.
yeah, and they treat their workers like garbage because I guess they don't have to care about the corporate chain and getting in trouble with a supervisor, or they really don't have to care about like bad press or bad rep because, again, what do they care about like on a national level if they have their local customers and they're only running one store in a small town? But yeah, it's
they really have they have the workers by the gonads because
yes,
like if trying to unionize a small business
Yeah.
is hard.
Hard.
Yes.
It's very hard because they do a lot of individual bargaining, so it kind of breaks solidarity very easily. And I have stories, but yeah, a lot of that happens. Very hard.
All right. Well, appreciate the call, Dave. It's a good point. Actually, I should say, Giga Daniel Ocean writes in, small businesses are such awful places to work because they're exempt from most fair labor laws and even some safety regulations, and it's easier to get away with it too.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, before I go, I wanted to say you guys are doing a great job. I love the Thursday shows, so you guys keep it up. And I think I'll leave with this question. Sorry for the noise working in my mind. So
All good.
I wanted to ask Brendan, since I've been trying to go on a soul journey, but I've been temporarily dissuaded with the broken toes. There's a lot of scams in gym culture, and I guess Matt can jump in this one too because he deals with that element too. What is the weirdest scam you've seen gym bros talk about? And I'll listen for what your answer is. All right, guys, later.
Later.
Gym bros specifically? Oh boy, that's.
I mean,
don't-
CrossFit's a pretty big one.
Yeah.
And
I
did
mean,
you
like,
guys see that Blake Masters had all these old CrossFit blog posts too? That where he said all of these things about how the United States should not have interfered in World War II, all that stuff. But anyway, it's just interesting how I feel like CrossFit's maybe a little bit of a breeding ground for some
Really?
fascists.
I mean, that's a very interesting. I need to look into that because
Yeah.
Blake Masters gets really mad if you call him a Nazi or something like that. He talks about
Washington
silly
Post
people.
wrote it up if you want to look it up.
So I would like to see him talking about World War II isolationism.
That's a really good question. And
About
you know,
gym scams?
about gym scams, because it's like a whole, it's a whole subculture. It's full of like folk knowledge and people who have like, heard a story about a story that this is the right way to like eat, or this is the right way to lift. I mean, not including stuff like Herbalife, which are like, obvious scams. But CrossFit's obviously a good example of like a subculture within a subculture, like that is in many ways antagonistic towards other lifters, and because they're like the world's fittest people in their own opinion. But I think supplements are the biggest scam. I think if you're going to be honest about working out and like the just sheer amount of money people spend on like supplements, like creatine and protein powders and various forms of like branched chains amino acids and vitamins that are like incredibly expensive. Most of that stuff is completely unnecessary unless you're A, competing at a really high level, or B, you're not getting nutrition in other sense, in other ways. Like it can be difficult to get in like enough protein a day without using a protein supplement. Creatine can be worthwhile because of how cheap it is, but at the end of the day, like vitamin shops and GNCs are just full of shelves and shelves full of like stuff that is not going to do anything for you. And there's very little regulation about what goes into vitamins and stuff like that. So I would just say, like, generally speaking, like I don't use any supplements besides protein powder for protein shakes and like caffeine because I like it to be high energy.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, when I see people like pushing any kind of like supplement from, Alpha Brain to Brain Force to Braintron to, just like your everyday average, like boutique creatine powder for like $50, I'm like, this is just way too much money. This is way too much money for very little effect to any effect.
And it's backed up by the fact that like Joe Rogan and Alex Jones are in that business.
It can get it's obviously there's a lot of there's a psychosomatic element to taking supplements that people feel like it gets them in, it's part of their fitness journey. It's part of like a holistic approach to fitness. But for the most part, if you're eating a well-balanced diet, if you're like having enough diverse foods and vegetables and etc., you oftentimes don't need anything in your diet extra. People who tell you otherwise are usually on steroids and trying to sell you that like,
Right.
Oh, it's not the D-ball I'm injecting into my eye sockets that is making me yoked. It's actually the fact that I microdose like beta alanine every morning. It's like, okay, thank you.
The Herbalife stuff, you mentioned it. That's wild. When I first found out about what they were running here, where like they skirt food regulation laws because they call themselves nutrition clubs. And if you order a smoothie there, it's considered like part of a membership. Like you're not actually ordering the smoothie, and you can't leave. You have to finish your smoothie at the store because if you leave, then it would be considered like they're giving you food. It's part of the whole thing. So you can't leave when you buy your drink. You have to finish it there. It's so weird.
Bizarre. All right, let's do this Dark Horse clip as our final clip of the day. And then we will take maybe one more call, read some IMs, get out of here. All right. Here is Brett Weinstein and Heather Hying, his wife, on the Dark Horse podcast, talking about vaccines once again. And you know that they are serious and definitely not conspiracy theorists.
Yeah,
selling you reactionary nonsense because they speak like this.
What you want to look for here is how they describe peer review. And one thing to note about the study that they're discussing, and I'll put the bad stats thread up, is it's already been debunked. One and
what is debunked?
Well, and two, it's not yet been peer reviewed.
What is peer review?
So here's these guys.
There is yet another paper. This one published in a mainstream place. It's still in preprint. It's not published. It hasn't even been peer reviewed, but by a reputable mainstream academic, suggesting that. Oh, hold on. I want to go here. Suggesting that the COVID vaccines are doing more harm than good. So you can show my screen here, Zach. The excess risk of serious adverse events of special interest surpassed the risk.
This is a problem with their original stream, her voice here.
Oh, I thought you were doing like a fake voice.
I was like, wow, is this like a Darth Vader situation?
Yeah, or else this is what happens when she knows she's talking shit.
Risk reduction for COVID-19 hospitalization relative to the placebo group in both Pfizer and Moderna trials, 2.3 and 6.4 per 10,000 participants, respectively. This is the paper. You can see they've put in big gray print across the back, preprint, not peer-reviewed. But as we've talked about before, you've got 7 authors on here who are effectively each other's peers who are peer reviewing it, and lots of other people who know what they're doing who have peer reviewed this effectively. But because most people who aren't scientists hear peer review as the sine qua non of what it means in good science, the fact that it's not peer reviewed is going to be used to dismiss it.
Sine qua non means this it can't exist without something else.
So she knows what that means, but she does not know that a peer means that you are by definition other people's peers.
Yeah, I mean she's full of shit or was massively underqualified to be a teacher. Peer, look at all these
I'm gonna
peers.
actually go with, after as much as I've heard from these two as I have, I'm gonna actually go with the latter. I don't think it's purposeful.
Yeah, I think they are just complete lunatics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there is a resistance, and this was especially true with the IDW, which I guess Brett Weinstein was a founding member of, a refusal to acknowledge that like expertise is like narrow. There's like there's such thing as like a narrow band of expertise. Like when you have a PhD, it's because you know a lot about a very small like topic that you've been able to like expand upon, and like, you know, otherwise topics outside of that field, you're not necessarily any more knowledgeable about than your everyday average layman.
I mean, Jordan Peterson's a great example of that.
Exactly. But in the dark web, you know, in the intellectual dark web, and also just I think generally within our like mainstream media circles, there is a crisis of expertise, not to borrow one of their phrases, when it comes down to just being willing to assume that anybody who is a PhD or anybody who has any kind of platform where they present themselves as an expert is capable of expounding upon like any topic, because that's how we treat like the op-ed section. And so it's very attractive to believe that, well, anything that you might want to learn about or like anything that is important to know, you can teach yourself like in a month using only the resources online. And you know, we just don't want to believe that like, okay, but it doesn't necessarily matter what somebody who has no familiarity with virology or epidemiology or public health has to say about especially not a non-peer-reviewed study about those topics. It's just, but you know, once you start confronting that, like their opinions don't really matter about that stuff, you get to the heart of like a lot of our, you know, political media industrial complex. Like what makes Barry Weiss capable of expounding on anything other than the fact that someone once hired her to do it.
Yeah.
Also, who do these people associate with who in July 2022 are still espousing that the vaccine is more dangerous than COVID? Like, where are all these deaths? 220 plus million people in the United States have been vaccinated. If these were dangerous in the ways that the dark horse people are talking about and other anti-vaxxers are talking about, we'd be seeing like mass casualty deaths. It would be so much. You would know someone in the same way that everyone at this point at least knows someone who got COVID. If they didn't get COVID themselves, you would know someone who died from the vaccine. But I know people who have died from COVID. I don't know anyone who's died from the vaccine.
Well, the reason that they're able to maintain their position is because they essentially, is my understanding, and I'm not a regular Dark Horse listener, but they contend that the either there's lies happening about the deaths, or that the effects of the vaccine are so scary and terrifying that there's some sort of delay and we won't know the full scale and scope of the effects on the human population until years from now, which is a position that allows them to speculate wildly and maintain like a fear-based narrative that draws an audience in that's divergent from mainstream thought. And then it feeds into people's narcissism. That is like what the whole anti-vax, you know, stuff and the influencers online about this really are tapping into with their audience, is this desire to have a narrative that is outside of the mainstream that makes you feel special and validates your choices that are, you know, inherently fear-based.
I would point people towards this bad stats thread for a more thorough debunking of this. But I mean, what Emma said is right. Even there's one thread here, which is one from the tweet from this thread here. That says, of course, Brett and Heather and most anti-vaxxers hold the unfalsifiable position that the real harms of the vaccine are undetectable until they result in mysterious and severe life-shortening illnesses down the road that the powers that be refuse to trace back to the vaccine. So ironically, Brett thinks the vaccines only mitigate COVID hospitalizations for a short period of time, whereas the vaccine adverse events happen in the long run, which is the inverse of reality. Yeah, and then they make other BS claims about. Heather talks about how there's no evidence that COVID decreases your likelihood of severe diseases. Of course, that is wrong. So these are just liars, and it's a beautiful victory for free speech. I'm told by people like Matt Taibbi that they're allowed to continue lying about this stuff and killing their audience. And I just think like we should put a flag down for free speech here.
Well, I was going to say, not to put a little bit of not play devil's advocate, but you said there's no evidence, but there are lots of videos on Instagram of British nurses shaking their camera wildly to prove that they've had some adverse effect of the vaccination. I don't know where they've all gone. Like there's kind of a peak of those that they've all sort of been disappeared. They were always British, always nurses, but that's just part of the scam. But I think Brett and Heather are good examples of a society, which we are, where like people know that science is necessary to make arguments, to make compelling arguments, but we don't really have a good science literacy. And not just not having good science literacy, our political media and education apparatus doesn't really teach people critical thinking very well. So like when you get into these kinds of backs and forth with like people on the other side of what they consider to be like a scientific position, they just want to debate like pseudoscience with you. They want to like point to anomalous effects or like, one or two incidents and imply that there must be a pattern here, even though it hasn't been identified by anyone who's doing real science, because they've recognized it. And I think as a society, very, very often enable that within our public officials and our public speakers, that they can just like expound endlessly about like anomalous events as though there are like patterns of behavior, and any evidence they provide is, equally weighted regardless of whether or not it's one scientist versus 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000.
And the fact that like any information or any content that validates one's claim is readily available and like can, for these kinds of people looking for it, when you can draw connections and create patterns based on like wildly differential and dispersed information that like does not necessarily have a connection, you feel like you're doing science, and science is a lot more accessible than like say a peer-reviewed, which is not without its faults in some instances.
Of course, humans are human.
Yeah, right. But for the most part, especially when it comes to the vaccine, like the peer-reviewed studies that have concluded that the vaccine is very safe and very effective have borne out to be true. But that is not, again, that does not feed people's need to like feel like they're tapping into some sort of alternative source that validates their perspective, and two, their desire for their own research to be their own and a part of their identity. And like science is inaccessible to some people, and the NPR voices make it seem like this is some sort of science when it's the opposite of such.
I guarantee you that more adjusted for audience size, more Dark Horse listeners have died from not getting the vaccine. The Majority Report viewers have died from getting the vaccine. I will make that bet 1,000,000 times out of 1,000,000. I also just want to remind people that Brett Weinstein does understand the idea that broadcasters have to be accountable, because this is what he said about me after I exposed him for talking with a DHS goon about race war at a event in public. And he wanted me, well, I guess he just says it doesn't get canceled, but I just want to put this up.
Yeah,
so
let's let him speak for himself.
When Brett talks about people needing to be responsible, this is just a good thing to know.
Challenged in a way that I actually probably should have seen coming, but I did not expect, which is, oh, I get it. You are in favor of cancel culture when it's about you. Now, this strikes me as insane. Why does Matt Lech need to be fired? He does not need to be canceled. I never wanted him canceled. He needs to be fired for cause. That's what used to happen in the adult world. When somebody, if your pilot shows up drunk, they need to be fired for cause. If your surgeon refuses to scrub up before surgery, they need to be fired for cause. That's not cancellation. This person does not belong in journalism. And if he just made an error,
If you make an error, you've got to be fired in the adult world.
Right back at you, Brett.
Speaking of errors, wasn't Brett also the one who didn't know that nut allergies could be airborne when he was tweeting about like how they weren't allowed peanuts on his plane, like a very basic medical fact, and now people are also getting medical information about vaccines from him. It's just, I think it's just hard for some people, especially once they've reached a pinnacle of one field, maybe, one or two fields, to admit that they don't know anything. And, or they don't know everything rather. And in this case, it's kind of both. He doesn't know anything, but also doesn't know everything despite having a high degree. So, I think there's an ego play here. Like, it doesn't matter how wrong you are, being unable to, rather how often you are wrong, being unable to take that and adjust your behavior based on it. Like, oh, maybe I should like learn more stuff as opposed to just expounding.
All right, we're going to take one more really quick call. This is the final call of the day. You got to be quick. Calling from an 814 area code. 814. Hi.
Hi, this is Margaret from Pennsylvania.
Hi, Margaret. What's on your mind?
Hi. Well, first of all, I just wanted to say that you are a really good interviewer.
Thank you.
Really good.
Thank you.
Two things. I wanted to just let people know on a positive note that Josh Shapiro, who's running for governor in PA against Doug Mastriano, who's a lunatic, has 12 Republicans of various backgrounds have come out publicly in support of Shapiro. And that's a really good thing. And the other thing is his ads, Shapiro's ads are amazing because he has been showing a lot of them elderly people. I think one is a veteran who went to him to have the Catholic Church prosecuted for child abuse that they experienced years and years ago. And Shapiro was instrumental in extending the statute of limitations so that these poor people could finally get their day in court. And it's so crazy because, a lot of conservatives are diehard Catholics, and yet there's no refuting these people on these ads. They're so powerful.
That's good.
So I wanted to tell you that. And then I also wanted to plug the National Infrastructure Bank Coalition. I'm still active with them. And your guest talking about the need for green infrastructure and money dedicated to doing what the country needs to do to create the energy supply that we need, nuclear fusion, desalination, those types of things are all part of the idea behind the bank. So if people could check out the website, it's nibcoalition.com, and just take a look. I'd really appreciate it.
So NIB is in boy or D?
Yes, it's the National Infrastructure Bank, NIB.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, awesome.
Coalition.com.
nibcoalition.com.
.com.
All right, well, awesome. Thank you so much, Margaret. Really appreciate the call.
Thank you. Yeah, keep up the good work, Emma. Really enjoy you.
Thanks, Margaret. I enjoy you.
No,
Bye. All right, the voicemail is going on. We're going to read a few more IMs, then we are going to get out of here. Adelseed, you are no longer putting the Fun Have YouTube link in the show notes in the Majority Report app. How do members access the full show now? Some things just, Matt's doing 2 jobs right now because Bradley's out, so just be patient with us.
Yeah, I mean, it's been in the YouTube comments, and it will be in the blog comments later.
Congressional baseball fan, Brett Weinstein needs to be something with cause for having a lamp made out of a parking meter as decor. That's trash interior design. It does not match their cabin in the woods vibe. I totally agree, congressional baseball fan. Jay Tingle, also, I forgot Matt Leck is like a drunken pilot. The parallel is mirror-like. I mean, we have drank at work before, and it's been fine. We're allowed to drink at work. Yeah.
But, I mean, I'll be... Me, high versus Brett Weinstein drunk. I'll take myself in that a battle of wits any day.
Planes fly themselves basically nowadays, so.
Yeah, you press There's like a great 30 Rock joke where Matt Damon plays like the pilot, and he was like, it takes a lot to press start autopilot then land, or like take off autopilot then land.
Also, if a pilot crashes his plane, kills maybe how many people go on a plane? A few hundred, and
Yeah.
then maybe like people on the ground. If you convince like 30,000 people not to take the coronavirus vaccine, like probably approaching those numbers.
Jay Tingle, Chris Pratt stars in a new Amazon Prime series as a Navy SEAL who is absolutely a homicidal maniac. I'm 5 episodes in and have yet to see a redemption angle. Either Amazon and Pratt want to send a cautionary message about militarism run amok, or he is way out there. Yeah, I would guess that redemption angle is not going to come based on the previews I've seen on television. Go ahead.
No, I think that he's just trying to compete with Jim from The Office for that kind of like MAGA crowd of like I don't know what you'd call it, Tom Clancy thriller stuff.
The people that love Lone Survivor, those kind of folks.
Right.
I saw
Nuclear Venezuela.
I saw American Sniper, which like I was told was supposed to be like a condemnation of U.S. militarism, directed by Clint Eastwood, and I found it to be like one of the worst like award movie baits I've ever seen. Like I was bored. It was not just bad, and the politics were bad. I was bored the entire time. Clint Eastwood is not like a good director, even though everyone in Hollywood tells me. Gran Torino was terrible. American Sniper was bad. Jersey Boys was worse. Like I have yet to see a movie directed by him that I've liked. But anyway.
Sniper with Mark Wahlberg kind of fits that bill. Like Sniper with not American Sniper, just Sniper with Mark Wahlberg.
Oh,
that
yeah.
kind of has like an anti-American tinge to it because he's been disavowed by the government, so he has to use his sniper powers to take him down.
Better.
I was gonna say, if you heard that American Sniper was like a critique of wartime, Clint Eastwood as the director should have tipped you off that I wouldn't have been.
I know. I don't know I don't know why. Like I heard that, but anyway.
Transformers is probably a better critique of wartime than American Sniper.
Honestly.
Yeah.
Custodial artist Emma, we would like a 1 hour apology about your personal hole in the ozone caused by your cashew consumption. Left is best. 3 more. Havana Syndrome. I am fortunate enough not to live in MTG's district, but am fortunate enough to live in her state. Even though I love this place, MTG's existence here is perpetuated by bigots or by people who are okay with bigotry being supported. There's got to be a cultural political shift in Georgia that makes it damn near impossible to be like this or support people who are like this. J-Man Raps. Hey guys, sorry, but Kevin Durant is going to the Raptors. I don't know.
Is he?
I would bet a little bit of money. I don't know if there's like futures on this that like something gets worked out with Brooklyn. I don't think.
Yeah, I think that they're gonna, at least for the start of the season, try to run it back. That's, I think, the odds-on favorite, and that is the odds-on favorite for betting right now.
Oh, it is.
Yep.
Wow, then I'm not original at all. And usually the books know something like that. So. Daredevil, Binder, when are Sam, Emma, Matt Leck, and David Griscom going to have the guts to take video calls from the audience? Just teasing at the crew, by the way. Love the show.
Oh yeah.
Binder does video calls?
I do video calls. Yeah.
Wow.
People
you play dangerous.
People have seen Kowalski at work on his tractor in the middle of the night. People have seen Dave from Jamaica, something that Majority Report fans have no idea what he looks like, but Doomed and Scam Economy listeners do. Yeah, people call in with video, and they offer. A new thing now is that people, thanks to Kowalski, like to show me where they're working while they're working. I enjoy it.
That's awesome.
That is cool.
Yeah. We've got a guy who works at a distillery who called in from his workplace. Yeah,
Dave from Jamaica has to call in.
Well, he just did. We talked to him just before, but not video.
Right, video, I mean, though, because he was talking about his workplace. And the final I am of the day. Gotta find it. Southern Socialist. I just learned that you don't need to be a lawyer to run for a municipal judge. Guess who sentences most criminals where you live? What if mass incarceration, abolishing a mass incarceration abolishing person ran and won? How many nonviolent offenders could you remand to house arrest and not send to prison?
We had I literally asked Ella Karakatsanis that question, and the answer is like it's kind of limited, but it's still worth doing.
Yes.
Because like if you did, let's say you started, if you decided you weren't going to like evict people or whatever, like those sorts of things, you're going to have, like, you see what happened to Chesa Boudin. You will have the wealthy reactionaries organize against you and politically attack you. And I would check out the Ella Karakatsanis Left Reckoning interview to touch on that question.
All right, guys. Great show today. Appreciate it. Check out Doomed. Check out Scam Economy. Check out the Discourse. Check out Left Reckoning. We will see you all tomorrow. Bye.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth